Senate Bill 184 Joint Service Update. And Paul, I'll go ahead and turn that over to Paul DeRocher.
All right. Thank you, Chair Hart. And thank you to the other members of the Transportation Commission and CTIO Board. I'm here as the Division Director for Transit and Rail, and I'd also like to just briefly introduce, before we get to the heart of the content, my Assistant Director for Passenger Rail. I don't think any of you have met her yet, but I'll let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon. My name's Mo Sullivan. I joined CDOT as the Assistant Director of Passenger Rail at the end of November. So really excited to be part of the team and excited to be part of CDOT during this really, thrilling time for passenger rail.
So thank you, Mo. So just as a brief introduction before Diane and the rest of the team give way to the presentation. As you know, SB 24-184 was primarily known for creating a user fee assessment on car rental of $3 a day. So that created a very nice opportunity for us to fund a lot of the initiatives that we have, particularly in the passenger rail space. But it also created some requirements for reports that we deliver to the state legislature and the Transportation Legislative Review Committee. So Diane, Del, and Tom are all here to give an overview of what was contained in that report. So with that, I'll turn it over to the team.
Thank you, Paul, very much. And let's not forget, we'll introduce ourselves, but we need to start with Brandon because he's actually the guy that does the most work of all of this.
Good afternoon, all. Brandon Schaefer, a Special Advisor for Passenger Rail and Transit.
I'm Del Walker with HMTB.
And Tom Rasakis with Ernst & Young, Financial Advisor to CTIO.
Thank you. And I'm Diane Barrett, Special Advisor to the Governor for Joint Service, which nobody has any idea what that is when I tell them. So it's really quite fun. Joint Service really is an ongoing planning study. It's kicked off by, sorry, I didn't listen to President Hart. So it's a planning study, and it was kicked off by Senate Bill 184 with several requirements for reports to the legislature, to the Legislative Review Committee, to the transportation committees of both houses. And we have been working since late summer together to bring everybody together, the transit systems in Colorado. The legislation requires all of the folks to work together, and it really stemmed from the fact that no one agency, not CDOT, not RTD, et cetera, has the ability to do the kind of financing that has to be done for rail. Rail is expensive. I know you find it expensive to do everything else in transportation, but rail is exceptionally expensive. And it's hard to find the efficiencies. And so when you have all kinds of agencies working together, there's a whole lot more opportunity to find the ways to make these things happen. So what we're trying to do is look at the possibility of a joint service, a starter service of what we call hybrid passenger rail. With respect to FRA and their definitions of commuter rail and passenger rail, they're not very clear on what's passenger rail exactly and what's commuter and so forth. There's fine distinctions. So we have sort of a mandate to go forward looking at a hybrid that will include perhaps 2, perhaps 3 more stops, not the 10, hopefully not less than 3, but 3 or 5 stops. And I think you can look on the slide that Del is going to start with and see what those 2 or 3 additions might be. So what is joint service? Well, first of all, it's working jointly together. It is intended to accelerate the starting time of real passenger rail in Colorado, along with, of course, mountain rail. And that's another thing to think about, and you're going to be talking about that too, I think. But currently, we're a good starting place, January 2029, according to the statute. And that's what we're aiming for, to reduce costs and to increase efficiencies and to work on collaboration in general among transit and transportation agencies to accomplish all those benefits. So what are the basics for joint service? The first is a set of 3 things that we decided early on at the end of August in one of our first in-person meetings. And by the way, the principals of these agencies now meet in person when they have a principals meeting, which I have found to be wonderful in working collaboratively. It just helps a lot to actually know who you're talking to. So we all are working toward one operator for this starter service, one access agreement with BNSF, and one alignment. So right now we're working on RTD's B line and then transferring to the BNSF freight line all the way to Fort Collins. Having one operator is going to be less expensive because it means that BNSF only has to work with one negotiator, and that is important to them. The single access agreement, same thing. BNSF is importantly wanting to have one. And then the alignment, of course, is essential that we know where we're going, where we're going to be stopping. So the starter service that we're looking at, in order to get something going that we think we can actually start in January of 2029, we asked Del and Tom to work with us to find the least possible cost service. And I know that sounds like it might be a kind of a risky step, but the fact of the matter is it allows us to answer one question that was explicit in 184. And that is, with the new revenue sources that we've given you, folks, can you take that money and add your own? And can you, in fact, start a starter service in this fashion by January of 29? It's important to know that the starter service that we're looking at paves the way for the future of front range passenger rail. It doesn't in any way inhibit, as the statute requires, their ability to go forward with their 10 stops and their in full-blown passenger intercity rail project. It allows for them to become part of the starter service, or it allows the starter service to ultimately acquire or merge with their service. So there's all kinds of opportunity in the future for all of that service. I'm almost finished. Hang in just a few more minutes. We're going to talk for 2 seconds about how we're operating here. We've set up 3 working committees with each of those committees has members from each of the agencies, and they are working together. Some of them meet regularly, some of them meet occasionally. Those committees are, as you might imagine, operations, funding and finance, and governance. Governance, you might be interested to know, we were required to decide how we're going to govern ourselves. And we did that early on. By the September 30th report, we knew that we were going to work with an intergovernmental agreement, maybe interagency agreement, but an agreement that we can all decide who is going to make decisions and how they're going to make decisions. Nothing has been decided. The boards of all of these agencies have to act before any real decisions can be made. But for now, we're operating under, well, Kathy could tell you, All the legal counsel for all of the agencies are meeting together pretty regularly, as I understand it. In fact, tomorrow, I think you have another gathering. And they've all been discussing all the issues for the IGA. And I think we're pretty close. They're letting me look at it finally, so that's good. And I think we're on our way with that. So that is working well, the governance, the operations, everybody meets. We have a meeting every week that we sometimes cancel, but we are meeting very regularly and addressing those important characteristics of this service. What is it going to do? Very specifically, what stations are we looking at? Where are our hangups with respect to boarding? Does it have to be level boarding? Can it be BNSF doesn't want that, et cetera, all kinds of issues that have to be worked through, and they're working so beautifully together. It's really, I think I'm having fun, and I think everybody seems to be having a good time working on these things because they're very important. I honestly think that's about all I need to say. Dell is going to take over here, and he's going to talk about this lowest cost option, and then we're going to hear from Tom about funding and what each of the agencies is thinking of doing, and take it away.
Thank you, Diane. Diane said I'm going to talk about the lowest cost options, but she's spent a lot of time talking about efficiencies. I want people to think about this as the most efficient way of moving forward. Even though it's the lowest cost option, it's an efficient way of making the service run. Next slide, please. So what did we do? We wanted to make sure, as we're approaching this challenge, is make sure that a base level set of investments were going to be implemented that would assure that it was the least cost option, but an efficient way of dealing with things. So the 8 stations that you saw on the initial slide, those are all included. The proposed infrastructure is intended to hold BNSF harmless. What does that mean? They have freight operations that they would want to continue. Any passage or movement from the hybrid train system that we're planning to implement can't impact their operations. Now, this is in the early infancy of everything that we're doing here. We've been having conversations with BNSF. There's been no final conclusion, but we are intending to hold their operations harmless during the implementation of this phase. In addition, we're looking at all of the FRA proposed positive train control signaling system that would be needed to make sure that that passage and movement of both freight and commuters works efficiently and effectively. And then there were the 3 and 5 round trips that were identified in Senate Bill 184. It was very clear and easy to make the assessment that 3 round trips is going to be more cost effective than 5 round trips. So that's where we started. You can see the passenger count that would be representative of that as a function of a weekly or annual passenger count. And very quickly, I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the actual implementation elements and what that looks like. So under the 3 round trip scenario, you can see some of the investments that would need to be made to ensure that the meet pass elements of a freight rail system running and meeting their timeline, and then a passenger rail, intercity rail, a hybrid rail perspective for commuters would be able to operate efficiently and effectively at the same time. Those meet pass creates locations where you're going to have track alignments that ensure that there's no interaction between the freight traffic and the commuter traffic. So those are investments that would need to be made. And I just wanted to show this to you so you recognize that this is included in our plan. These investments are all there and are part of the way we see things moving forward. Very quickly in the next slide, under the 5 round trips, and I don't know if you can toggle back and forth between the 3 round trips and the 5 round trips so that you can see the difference in the investments that are made under a 5 round trip scenario. More trains on the system with the same freight traffic would mean additional investments necessary to make sure you had that meet pass capability without impacting BNSF's operations. That's the only thing I wanted to show you. I didn't want to get too technical, but the investments are there under the 3 round trips. That's what we're looking at right now. So any of the numbers that you see moving forward are relative to that. Next slide, please. So again, the lowest cost option being the most, I guess, economical solution to this issue comes to $885 million. There was a contingency approach, and I'll go into that a little bit later in one of the next slides, that talks about another way of looking at it, not the most conventional way, where additional savings could be applied, and to the tune of another $100 million. Next slide, please. So under the FRA kind of required cost categories, we broke everything down into each one of those. The green line that you see there is unallocated contingency. Unallocated contingency is a way in the early development of a design effort. You can place dollars. You don't have any bids yet. You haven't really completed the design. So let's just place a pot of money to make sure that you're not going to go over budget by having unallocated contingency. On the left-hand side of the screen, all of the SCC codes, or those are codes for the normal categories that FRA would expect. Those have allocated contingency in addition to the unallocated contingency. So what you see on the left-hand side, that growth factor is both unallocated and allocated contingency for each individual line item. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, that is stripping out allocated contingency and just having an unallocated contingency for that, for the cost there. I didn't want to go too much into that. It's a non-conventional approach to use the contingency approach, and is not in accordance with, in my mind, where I think we're at from a design perspective. So let's just stick with the lowest cost option, the 885, and I'm going to go into the individual details about each of the SCC codes elements as we move forward. Next slide, please. So starting with vehicles. So for the service that we're planning to provide under a 3 round trip scenario, you're not going to need as many trains as you would for a 5 round trip scenario. So we allocated the right number of trains, a 5-car consist, a locomotive, a cab car, and 3 passenger cars. That would serve as kind of the basis. The numbers from a 3 round trip scenario, plus the ability to have an extra set that could be used to make sure that you have the right level of spare capacity for the train operations. So that's 4 sets of trains that you would have, the 3 round trips, plus the spare, and it's a reduced number relative to a 5 round trip, or even the full build out of Front Range and the incredibly large number of trips that would be expected under the full build out. So that's where we came up with the 124 million. And again, I believe this is consistent with practices relative to what you would have for spares and the need for trains on the system. Next slide, please. So from a station, terminal, and intermodal perspective, don't get wound up on those big words there, but that's the SCC category that you would have under an FRA scenario. Stations, terminals, and intermodals. We have a $92 million cost. What does it do? That's essential amenities for the stations. We're talking about platforms. The platforms don't need to be as long as they would be if you were going to have the full Front Range passenger rail service and, let's say, 10 trains, 10 round trips a day. No, we could do this in a much smaller set, shorter platforms that would meet the needs of the 5-car consist, and that's going to reduce the size of the platforms. And then we don't have any, I would say, additional amenities beyond the platforms and the ability to access the train at a proper setting. Those additional elements are under consideration for potential participation from some of the other funding sources. But that's where that 92 million comes from. Next slide, please. So the support facilities, yard shops, admin buildings, this is where you're going to have the ability to maintain the train sets, have a facility at either end that would ensure the location where you can maintain those. That's being considered as part of this effort. We have not made any considerations as to maybe sharing a facility in the event that Mountain Rail has a need for a facility. Is there a shared scenario that could additionally reduce those costs? That's not considered under this scenario. This is the full need for a maintenance facility exclusive for what we have for FRPR. And this again is the northern segment of FRPR and the needs associated with that. Next slide, please. So communications and signaling, I spoke early on about the positive train control that's necessary for this system, making sure that that was included. There are other communications elements and signaling in and along different parts of the system. That is another inclusion that you see here to make sure that we are right-sizing this, ensuring the signaling meets the needs of the operations as we're intending. Next slide, please. So the site work right-of-way land acquisition, I'm sorry, right-of-way land and existing improvements. There were some elements from some of the initial estimates that we had performed where we needed to go back and take a look. We found some additional earthwork and environmental efforts that would need to be done due to one of the sightings that had not previously been considered. So there's a little bit growth in that number. But that's what's represented here, and that's 16 million. Next slide. So track structures, another location where we found some changes to what we had looked at originally and made sure that the CRISI funded elements are included in what we have as part of the lowest cost option. And that means there's some additional retaining walls and culverts and turnouts that are necessary, but a slight growth in that number from what we had seen before. Next slide. And then professional services. Typically, when you're looking at professional services, it's a percentage of construction costs. So as these construction line items came down, the professional services component also came down. But wait, there's more. From an environmental perspective, we just felt like the constrained nature, knowing exactly where the alignment is on this system is going to minimize the amount of environmental impacts that will need to be looked at and could reduce the cost relative to the environmental assessment that's going to need to be performed to confirm where we're at. So we were able to reduce both based upon the lower construction cost and a tighter review of some of the environmental efforts that would need to be performed. Next slide, please. So that takes you back to the first slide where I showed the 885. This is the summary. Again, not really focused on the 785, but more focused on the 885 as the lowest cost, most economical option that meets the service needs for this corridor. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk about the money.
I got one. I'm good. Thank you, Del. And this next presentation, what we've been asked to do is to pull in all the information that H&DB has pulled together on the cost side of the equation, and then look at the various revenue sources that are available to the project from the legislations that were recently passed in order to identify a potential funding gap under this 3 round trip scenario. And these inputs will inform the conversations with the stakeholders going forward. If you turn to the next page, you can keep going. And you can go again. Perfect. And just to repeat, the scenario we are looking at is the 3 round trips of joint service that includes 3 RTD stations and then intercity stations from Boulder through Fort Collins. And with the idea of opening service in 2029. The numbers that Dell just talked about resulted in $885 million cost in 2025 dollars. Those dollars would need to be inflated to year of expenditure. And so if you were to inflate those over a conservative construction timeline, those numbers increase to $1.1 billion. Now, we are also looking at a scenario because 2029 is the targeted date for opening service. If we can accelerate environmental review, given some of the considerations that Dell talked about, that number in our latest numbers is something closer to $956 million, right, in year of expenditure dollars. And so some numbers that we show later on will be based upon that more aggressive timeline. But you'll see on the right the breakdown of the costs that Dell talked about in the prior conversation. One of the components of rail is that you actually have to operate it. And so there's an operating cost. And that operating cost, those projections are $32 million in the first year of service, rising up to $59 million, inflating in 2050. And over on the right-hand side, you'll see all the various components that go into that in terms of fuel, staffing, fare collection, overhead costs, so on and so forth, as well as host railroad fees. So if you take a look at the various sources of funding that are available to this project, you start with sources for capital as well as sources for operating. Start with actually some funding that's already available, CRISI grant that was awarded, $66 million, as well as state matching funds of close to $30 million that have already been identified. In addition to that, there's the SB 184 revenue that will flow through CTIO. The SB 230 fee revenues that'll flow through the CTE, and then and the ability to raise financing against those revenue streams, so external financing proceeds through bonds or loan programs, as well as, given the joint service nature of this, an RTD potential capital contribution. And all those revenues, some of those revenue streams, the SB 184, the 230, the RTD, as well as Farebox, would be available for operations and maintenance. And we have over here on the right-hand side those various sources. So we're going to dig in a little bit into the revenue sources. So SB 184, as you'll see on the left, this is the rental car fees. And the white line representing the full amount that the department will be receiving. And then we show here a 50% allocation. And we're doing that because that's been our assumption in running these numbers around what would be available for Front Range passenger rail, with the assumption that the remainder will be available for Mountain Rail. And so you'll see that on both of these. So you have CDOT's projections on the 184 revenues on the left, and you have the projections on the 230 revenues on the right-hand side. And so any numbers that we're running here are based on the assumption of 50% going to Front Range. Next page. And just delving a little bit more, and Craig, if you feel free to jump in here, but the SB 230 revenues were divided into three various categories. The 20% going to the Rail Funding Program Cash Fund, and that is the amount that we are projecting. So in those prior pages, that's the amount we're looking towards for being available for CDOT's contribution to these projects. And then there's the remaining 70% going to Local Transit Grant Program Cash Fund, as well as the Operations Cash Fund, the 70%. And so it's the sliver on the top on the right that is our assumptions for availability for this project. Next page. So we talked about RTD potentially being a funding partner in here, and just to get this group up to speed as to what the finances of RTD, what they constitute. RTD is funded by a 1-cent sales tax divided into two different types. The base system is 60% of that, and then there was the fast tracks tax, the 40% that was voted in the early 2000s for the fast tracks program. And you'll see on the right-hand side, roughly $900 million collected today, and RTD projects that growing to close to $2 billion by 2050. They're projecting a 3.4% increase in sales tax revenues. And then when voters approved fast tracks, they approved it with bond authorization. And there's a three-pronged test there in terms of total principal and maximum annual debt service and total debt service. But on the right-hand side, we just focus right now on the principal amount. And so of the 3.477 billion that was authorized, roughly $308 million of voted capacity has not been used to this date. Next page. But of course, when you think about the ability for a transit agency to be able to issue debt, there's one part of the equation is the voted capacity here in Colorado, but the other portion being the available cash flow in order to service that debt. And so what we have here is a snapshot of RTD finances as they've disclosed for the next 5 years. You see on the top, transit agencies, will spend all their dollars in terms of operations and debt service, and you'll see those on the bottom of those bar charts. But then RTD is also making contributions to various reserves and drawing on various reserves over the next 5 years. So you'll see the total system on the top left, and the fast tracks, which is roughly 40% of that, is on the right-hand side. And what you see on the bottom is the available reserves that RTD, as it has stabilized, right, and really focused on, in particular, the base system and putting improvements and replenishing their base system, putting money into reserves. Currently, they'll have close to $1 billion in reserves forecasted for the coming fiscal year. And then over the next 5 years, drawing that down to roughly $850 million. Part of that is board policy around operating reserves, capital replacement reserves, putting money away for capital replacement. And then there is a separate Fast Tracks internal savings account, the FISA account, that is currently $190 million and growing to $260 million. And then you'll see on the bottom an unrestricted reserve that they've built up and are projecting to draw down the complete amount in the next 5 years. So, in terms of, that speaks to some of the reserves here in terms of their ability to finance. There need to be an understanding what the projections look like beyond these 5 years, because that's where that debt service would come into play and their capacity to be able to service that debt service. So where does that lead us in terms of putting all these pieces together? And what we've done here is a gap analysis to understand what is needed in addition. So if you take the amounts that are already in hand in terms of Christie and the state match, if we were to annualize the remaining costs of the build out, the 3 round trip build out, that'll be made up of debt service, so annual debt service on the remaining capital portion, as well as operations and maintenance. And you'll see in the opening year of service, assuming we can open in 2029, that those costs are roughly $83 million. So that $51 million is debt service and $32 million of operations and maintenance. And then what you'll see is what we have available is $42 million in revenues, right? That's the state revenue from the 2 revenue sources we discussed earlier, leaving a gap of roughly $41 million annually. And that $41 million can go to, can be filled in terms of capital contributions as well as operating support. And then we see in 2050, those costs rise clearly due to inflation. And we also have in here a number that still has to be more fleshed out, but a rough estimate now, because you need to take into account money to be set aside for a state of good repair and renewal and replenishment of the rail system. And so that number, let's say, grows to roughly $144 million, with roughly $78 million available from state sources, leaving a gap of $67 million in 2050. And so that's the state of what we're looking at right now in terms of financial capacity and potential funding sources for this project. And I guess we'll just open it for questions.
Yeah, I will do that. I do want to say one thing first. BNSF knows exactly what we're presenting, but I am required to say that it is not the product of any negotiations with BNSF.
Vice Chair Adams.
Well, first of all, listen, I think this is very well done, very comprehensive. My question is with respect to RTD. Now, I don't know a lot about RTD's finances because I haven't delved into them too greatly. But the little bit I do know about them, I would think that anything that really tapped their reserves to the extent that this analysis assumes that you're going to take advantage and reduce their unrestricted reserves down to the level that I see on the schedule I'm looking at. I'm troubled by, so I'm just curious about what does that really do to their capability if we actually did this? And how do we ensure that the existing ridership in that part that would ordinarily rely on RTD, and I'm assuming it's a trade-off, that what you're really doing is RTD is somehow providing or relying on Front Range to offset some of what they would ordinarily deliver. So could you explain a little bit more why the RTD board and others would be comfortable with this sort of plan, where you would be depending on RTD? I was a little surprised at the extent to which RTD is part of the funding plan.
Right. I think that to be clear is we currently don't have any RTD sources in this funding plan, right? So we have a gap. And so ultimately it'd be the decision of the RTD board, right? We don't have an understanding of their finances going forward and how they're making those choices. So I think the purpose of these presentations, and we've given this presentation to the RTD board, right? And so the purpose of that is to put the information out there and ask the question. And I think ultimately, right, Diane, I mean, it'd be ultimately up to RTD to figure out how its priorities fit vis-a-vis its finances.
So part of that $41 million gap you show and the other gap could be made up of from places like RTD.
Exactly.
All right, gotcha. Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair Hart. Just a quick clarification here. Our slide, that last slide that you showed is, that we got in our packet is slightly different than this one shows 2032 that I've got here in 2029. So when I start talking to people out in the community, which one do I use?
I think, the goal is 2029, right, Diane?
Yes, the statute actually says that we had to answer the question with respect to having enough money for having a start on January 2029. So we are working toward that, and I'm sorry that we didn't get the thing changed at time, but we believe that we can start in 29.
Oh, okay, so then I guess my request would be if we can get a copy of the one that we're actually looking to try to get accomplished. Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Oh, Commissioner Cook.
Yeah, I got to watch the town hall earlier this week. That was great. So I had a couple of questions. In that session, Lisa Kaufman talked about hoping to keep right-of-way within the existing BNSF held. Did I hear that right? As a way to perhaps minimize the NEPA work that was required. Did I?
Again, that's a kind of a new concept that we're talking about, and the principals meeting in the next week or two is going to discuss it thoroughly, but it has to do with a proposal of off mainline platforms. It's complicated, but you did hear it correctly. There is a potential that the work could be done basically on BNSF work property, changing the NEMA requirements somewhat.
Yeah, and the discussion then also about fare setting being important, I think was key. It's so good to see the results of the ski train fare reduction, because that, even though it's not completely comparable, right? But that can feed into what you set as potential price points for this. And I really think that's key. So I just wanted to, say thanks and underscore that point. But
Good, tell others.
yeah, it's really big. And then finally, I just wanted to express support for your decision to go with the more conservative, low cost, the 885. Fast Tracks haunts us today. And Cal Marcella at RTD used to say that we could have taken the Great Recession, or we could have taken the big burgeoning materials costs that you saw with India's and China's massive growth in the aughts. But having them both was really what he felt was critical. And since we're struggling to rebuild credibility in the wake of that, I'm hopeful that you are bearing that in mind. I'm sure you are. And especially since we don't have a lot of history on some of the revenues, 184 and 230. So anyway, just underscoring that piece as well. And thank you so much. This is so exciting to see.
Thank you for your comments.
Vice Chair Adams and then Commissioner
So-
Cook and then Commissioner Garcia.
I have a question for Dale. So Dale, in the slide and it was very helpful, by the way, the slide that you use for what you call the preliminary route. When I first started hearing about this, I heard that the rail bed was rated at about 90 miles per hour that's out there today. But your slide suggests that we have some need to upgrade the rail bed. And so my question is to what extent does that really need to be done? And exactly what does the term upgrading the rail bed really mean in terms of what we need to do, and how risky is that what we think about as upgrading the rail bed could turn out to be a bigger than a breadbasket kind of initiative?
So I appreciate the question, and it's a great question. There are freight trains operating on the system right now, operating safely. I don't know that they could manage a 90-mile an hour speed for an intercity rail traffic that would really need to make sure that that's a compliant ride. So we do have costs associated with upgrading the rail bed in sections of the BNSF territory that would make sure that we're able to provide the ride necessary to attract riders, regardless as to the fare structure. But if it's a bumpy ride, you're not going to want to get on the train. So we do have costs associated with that. We've got contingency to make sure that we can capture that. Additional surveys still needs to be done to make sure that we're capturing all locations and the information. But again, that's what we have contingency for. We're still early in the infancy of the design effort. There's lots of work to be done. We believe that we've captured appropriate costs through direct cost and contingency, but more work will still need to be done.
Commissioner Stewart. Got you? Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you had the question too.
I do. Thank you.
Okay.
Discombobulated today, sorry. Okay, I want to thank all the work that's been done on this joint service project, and I'll tell you why it means a lot to me. In 2004, I was mayor of Broomfield, and I stood with all the mayors in the Metro Mayors Caucus and asked people to vote for Fast Tracks, because all of us got something out of it, or were intended to get something out of it. And we felt like the economic development opportunities and the quality of life opportunities and all the things that come with train travel would benefit the Denver metro region and, in fact, the state of Colorado. And through the years, we've been disappointed that there hasn't been enough money available to do what we needed to do to finish Fast Tracks. And I was telling Dell a minute ago, I've been complaining for 30 years. So I feel like this is a good opportunity to maybe give some kudos instead of complaints. The thing that's great about this is that Fast Tracks on the Northwest line had stations available up through Denver and over to Boulder. And before this joint services scheme came about, it looked like Broomfield and Louisville were going to be left out. And we've paid into this for years as well as everyone. And in fact, we did quite a lot of work to anticipate rail travel in Broomfield and Westminster and Louisville. And this joint services have pulled in those three stations. Westy now has a station, but it's end of line. And that wasn't anticipated to be end of line. The next station is Broomfield. And then the next station is Louisville. And if you've been to Louisville, their whole built environment was anticipated to have a rail stop. So this is an opportunity, I think, to complete a project that had such huge support in 2004 and through the years have tried to keep it alive. And I'm hoping that the numbers that you've pulled out are the right numbers to make this happen. And I hope that the collaboration that happens between the agencies that are part of this joint service and also the stakeholders within all these communities. I have other things to say about the N line, and Paul's listened to me rant about the N line for years, and I won't finish that rant today. But this is a great opportunity, and I think the fact that RTD can't do it alone, CDOT can't do it alone, Front Range Rail can't do it alone. This is a great collaboration. So thanks for coming. Thanks for giving us this information. I'm supportive, hugely supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Chair Hart. Thank you for the presentation. I did sit in on the town hall the other day too, so a nice chance to see the presentation again. Lots of questions, which we don't have time for, but I got a couple. One is with that funding gap that you illustrated, what is the strategy on that? And with that, what are your next steps, please? Thank you.
I'm going to ask Brandon to do this.
Good afternoon. I think the next steps here are, this is the first time, so March 1, we submitted the report. We presented to the RTD and FRPRD boards. This is the exact presentation that you all received. And so next steps are just following up with those boards to lay out what the next steps actually are, which is entering into more formal negotiations of what RTD's contribution could be. That $41 million gap doesn't mean $41 million in cold hard cash. It means it could come from different sources. For example, we need to operate and negotiate with DTO as well to get access to the B line for this. So that's what that looks like, setting that next phase up. But it's been a mad sprint for the past 3 weeks to get all this information out, begin stakeholding it. But the next phases are really General Manager Johnson talking to her board, laying out next steps, and then also starting to actually go through their formal process of their boards at RTD to kind of, or their committees at RTD to go through and show them what the gap is and what they are comfortable contributing to this project.
All right, thank you. And next question, Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you again, Chair Hart. I agree. This has been exciting news to hear. Been involved in trying to get rail done for a long time, and trying to finally get some funding makes it exciting. My question goes to 184 revenues and 230 revenues. So as part of those next steps, I'm assuming that you will be coming forward to those boards for requests for these levels of funding that you have outlined in this particular presentation.
Yes, indeed. Craig, Piper? I think they expect us.
Yes, and I think just to add on to that and provide a little bit of a springboard off of what Brandon was saying earlier, the funding request won't be a huge lump sum all at once. There are sort of sequential purchases that will need to happen, in which, you know, those funds will be contributing to the gap for the capital and operational needs. And so yes, absolutely, those boards will be approached kind of as those funding needs come about.
And I guess my next question is timeline?
Well, we're working on that. We have put a straw man in front of the principals. And the next principals meeting, I think we'll be concentrating highly on the timeline. This is the kind of thing where things can get delayed pretty easily. And delay basically kills projects like this. So we are not going to let that happen. So we have a pretty strict timeline that we're going to try to adopt and try to stick to it.
All right, any other questions or comments? Okay. Just a quick comment from me. Thank you very much. I find this an absolutely fascinating presentation, and I know that the work that you're trying to tackle in such a compressed period of time is just incredible. And so I'm pretty thrilled and pretty excited with the work you're doing and this one-time opportunity for all of us to come together to accomplish such a project. I personally am a huge supporter of passenger rail. Used to be on the Passenger Rail Commission. And it's something that frankly I've wanted to see since I first heard a presentation from CDOT when I was a sophomore in high school in Aurora, Colorado. And I asked them how long it would take to get it going. And the gentleman said probably at least 20 years. That was a long task, 20 years. So God bless you. I'm extremely excited about this. I now live in southern Colorado. And so obviously what we're doing is we're watching, we're trying to learn, and at the same time, we're trying to figure out how to keep what our needs are going south, particularly down south into Colorado Springs and Pueblo, to keep that going at the same time, but without distracting from the incredible work that you're doing. So thank you so much for your presentation. But whenever I hear a passenger rail presentation, I have to put a shout out for Southern Colorado. So, all right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, I think that we need to conclude the CTIO portion.
Thank you. This is Karen Stewart, Chair of the CTIO Board, and the meeting has concluded. I'm adjourning CTIO. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and proceed into our next item on the agenda, which is the Grand Valley MPO Greenhouse Gas Transportation Report. And I'll turn that over to Darius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Grand Valley MPO is presenting their greenhouse gas transportation report as required under 2 CCR 601-22 as part of the provisions of the greenhouse gas planning standards. So they're here today to present the report, and the report will be up for acceptance by the commission at the April meeting, but they're here to answer any questions commissioners may have as part of this process. So I'd like to introduce Dana Brosig, Executive Director. You'll have to correct me, Dana, if I got the title wrong, but Executive Director of the Grand Valley Metropolitan Planning Organization, who will go through the presentation and be able to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to join remotely. Couldn't justify all the VMT to make a presentation about reducing VMT. So I am Dana Brosig. I am the Director of the Regional Transportation Planning Office. And we represent the Grand Valley MPO, and that's fine. The next slide is fine. We represent the Grand Valley MPO, the Grand Valley Transportation Planning Region, and we are also the contract administrators and overview Grand Valley Transit. And so I thought I would just start with a quick overview of the Grand Valley MPO. You can see it here in the orange on this map. It does include the city of Grand Junction and the city of Fruita, the town of Palisade, and the urban area of unincorporated Mesa County. The area outside shown on this map is the TPR. And as I said, as our TPO, we oversee the transportation planning for both the TPR and the MPO. So for the regional transportation plan, it's similar to other MPOs, RTPs. It is a 25-year long-range vision for the Grand Valley transportation system. We want to make sure that we're efficiently moving people and goods, that we're supporting future growth and development, and that the future investment and strategies will address the needs, the infrastructure needs in the region. This is a fiscally constrained plan as required by federal regulations. The vision statement that we updated as part of this plan is shown on the right. We really wanted to focus on the impact of transportation on the community and on people. So we wanted to start our vision statement with communities, just acknowledging that without people and communities, we wouldn't have to plan our transportation system. We wanted to make sure also that we are designing for all people and all users, all different modes of transportation. And so that's reflected in our long range plan. Do the next slide. So we've been working on our long range plan for about a year. So this just kind of shows the process that we've gone through. We started with a lot of public and stakeholder involvement. We were present at 8 events across the community, just talking about transportation and trying to help get community feedback on our vision and our objectives. We also did a lot of focus groups, and this is something we found is a really effective way to get input from different industries that's a little bit more depth than you could receive just by a survey or public outreach. So we did a lot of different focus groups with folks from different industries just to talk about our transportation system impact on that industry. And it was actually really interesting, just some of the overlap that we found. For example, the agriculture focus group, there was a lot of talk about a need for wider shoulders to move farm equipment around in rural areas. And then we'd hear the same thing from the bike ped focus group about people who like to also bike in rural areas and like having shoulders as a place to also ride. So a lot of great information was gleaned from those focus groups. We then updated our goals and objectives. And then we started working on our project list and the prioritization process. We did work with our local governments and CDOT to project the revenue that would be received for like strategic transportation projects. For the plan, it is about $650 million in projects across all the jurisdictions. We also had a project prioritization process that helped to kind of whittle down the many projects that are needed. Oh, if you could go back, I'm not quite ready yet. Just to whittle down the projects, our performance measures were safety, efficiency, healthy environment, economic vitality, and community impact. And so we use those performance measures and the data that we had to kind of score those performance measures in our project prioritization. And then with that, we developed our fiscally constrained project list that we then modeled for our greenhouse gas analysis. We're at the end of this process now. We're here today presenting to you. And as Darius said, you guys will be deciding on this at your April meeting. And then we are planning on taking it to our board, the Grand Valley Regional Transportation Committee, for adoption on April 28th. All right, next slide. So as we started the greenhouse gas analysis, we really, and I guess just our modeling for our area, we started by, kind of analyzing like what's changed since the 2045 RTP. We've been through a pandemic and there's been some change in travel behaviors, some new local regulations and plans, and also just kind of a change in what's available as far as like e-bikes and e-scooters and that sort of thing. So we reflected these in our model first. So starting at the top, we were able to change our work from home rate as a result of a lot more people working from home. We used the American Community Survey data for our baseline assumptions as well as for our compliance years. And you can see we kind of had a big jump between the baseline and the 2030 compliance, but then kind of flattened out the growth. So there's a small amount of growth as there's more fiber and that sort of thing. This is very close to what other MPOs did with their transportation plans. I will say I think ours was actually on the lower end, which seemed to be more reflective of our community here in Grand Junction, the Grand Junction area. We also changed or increased the modeled walk and bike speed. And you can see that too was a slight increase, but just reflecting on the improvement in the infrastructure, and then also the increase in the number of e-bikes and e-scooters that we see being used. And again, this is also similar to what other MPOs did with their long-range plans. Something that we had to kind of reprogram into our model was the new projections from the state demographers. So that did match between the baseline and the compliance years, so that even though the state demographer was projecting slower growth, that didn't result in our lower greenhouse gas emissions. We scaled down our socioeconomic data in our baseline assumptions so that those were similar between the baseline and the updated model. Something that we do every year is, or not every year, but every time we update our plan and our model, we update the socioeconomic data. So this is a manual process, and that staff works with planning departments and maps out, like he literally takes paper maps and draws on where they think and are seeing development occurring, and then that's programmed into our model. So there has been some pretty significant changes locally, which I'll go into more detail on in future slides, but that have changed the land use across our community. I can do next slide. So this is just a list of some of the plans that have been updated in the last 5 years. So our local governments have been very busy, a lot of comp plans updated and design standards, bike ped plans. And I guess as a general statement, there has been a greater focus on denser, more compact land uses. There's also been a focus on more multimodal transportation infrastructure and connectivity, support for improved transit service and transit amenities, and then just a general desire to protect vulnerable road users, which is kind of connected to that infrastructure, but then also just we did a safety action plan that was adopted last year, just also doing more work to educate the community so that those users feel safer and are able to safely ride on our streets. Next slide. There's also been a lot of government initiatives around transportation, a lot of local, state and federal investment in multimodal infrastructure. So you can see we've completed almost 22 miles in multimodal infrastructure, have about 13 miles in design, and about 4 miles are under construction. So a lot of these have been led by local governments with help from different funding sources, but seeing some of the gaps in our multimodal system filled in, making it easier to use. The city of Grand Junction is also, and this is actually an error because it changed that night, but that I sent this, but they're going to be hearing for the impact fees, new impact fees, which include a new active transportation impact fee. So that's actually expected now to pass in April, but just a change also in a new funding source for active transportation projects. There was an e-scooter pilot project that started in May of 2023. There's been about 185,000 rides since that's happened, and that is now transitioning to a permanent program. So that's something that's changed since the 2045 RTP. And then, as I mentioned, there's just a lot higher usage of e-bikes. This has been due to the state rebate programs, but there has also been some locally led rebate programs for e-bikes. And there's, an increase in technology, a decrease in cost, and improved infrastructure has helped to increase that usage. So these are some of the things that helped us to justify that increase in walking and biking speed that we integrated into our model. Next slide. And these are just 3 examples of projects that have been completed in the last 5 years. So the 24 road and G Road interchange or intersection is a new roundabout, and this connects the community hospital, Canyon View Park, the mall area, and a lot of residential areas. And so this is a much improved corridor that's a lot easier for active transportation modes to use. The second project is Four Canyons Parkway, and this is a new road that's been constructed. It parallels Patterson, if you know Grand Junction, going by the mall. So it's a lot, it's a needed kind of redundancy in our system, but also provides a new multimodal facilities that are much easier to use than the busy area right around the mall. And that this too connects to that 24 road corridor. And then this North Avenue Advanced Transit Corridor is a project that's in design right now. You can see that it is not developed. There's a lot of areas on the east end that have no sidewalks at all, or that just ends in a power pole. There's irrigation ditches if you go off the sidewalk. So it's a pretty detrimental area if you're in a wheelchair or on a bike. And so there's funding now to construct a 1 mile detached path on the east end of this roadway. So these are just some examples of the types of projects that our local governments have been investing in to try to make it easier to take non-motorized modes of transportation. Next slide. So going into a little bit more detail on local government initiatives, the Grand Junction Comprehensive Plan has established growth tiers and incentive areas to promote infill development. The Zoning and Development Code also established mixed-use zones to encourage infill and redevelopment of commercial, residential, and mixed-use development within surrounding uses, and has also implemented parking reduction incentives near transit stops. The Mesa County Master Plan also analyzed areas of stability and change to prevent sprawl and preserve rural character. So we really are seeing more push for a greater push for that infill development and higher density development and connectivity, I guess, in our communities. A lot of local governments also have been partnering in and incentivizing high density affordable housing developments in response to the housing shortage. So this has these changes, I guess, in these plans have led to a change in some of the development that we're actually seeing on the ground in construction and the plan development moving forward. The next slide. So this is a map of the land use assumptions that have changed. So as I mentioned, staff actually goes and talks to planning departments and sketches out where the development is planned to occur. So this is looking into 2050. The areas in blue are areas that had increased density. And so you can see kind of those pockets lighting up. And then because we have, the state demographic kind of projects like the total amount, and then we decide how it's distributed. The areas in pink are where that density came from. So that doesn't mean there's no growth in the pink areas. It's just slower growth or less dense developments by 2050 in our model. So you can go to the next slide. And so this just highlights, and I have some pictures of these, but highlights some of the developments that I'll be talking through that has led to this change in density in those areas. And go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, that 24 road corridor is a major area where there's been a lot of development. That's where that new roundabout was constructed. The new hospital was built out there several years ago, but there's been a lot of work by the city of Grand Junction. They've described it as a sub area in the comprehensive plan and have seen a lot of high density housing in this area. The Current is a new affordable housing project that is being managed by the Grand Junction Housing Authority, is also in the area. So that's some of the reasons that area in the 24 road corridor have increased in density. And go to the next slide. The junction there on the left is a 256 unit apartment building that is actually just opened in downtown Grand Junction. This was supported by a $2.4 million incentive package from the city of Grand Junction, and this is the site of the former city market. Here in Grand Junction is now much denser housing. There's also another planned development here downtown that's the former Greyhound terminal that will be a mixed use development that has artist studios and creative spaces, as well as about 100 residential units, with about 30% of those being affordable housing. Next slide. This is an area that's down by the river, so you can see the Colorado River there, kind of in the middle. And so this is new mixed-use developments located between downtown and the Colorado River. And so it's planned to see a lot of development here, again, higher density housing. Another area, the Salt Flats, the city of Grand Junction recently purchased about 22 acres to help facilitate up to 500 affordable housing units, with 70% of those units being affordable. So this is another area that just lit up as higher density in these areas. And there's also new roads planned to improve connectivity between these areas and other areas as part of these developments. Next slide. Here on the left is the launch. This is out in Fruita, and again on the Colorado River is also a mixed-use development. And then the Clifton Community Campus isn't a housing development, but it is something that Mesa County has been working on and finished last year. And it's a community center, a large childcare facility, and a library. And this is kind of part of their master plan to encourage the Clifton area to develop more as complete neighborhoods with services and amenities near that housing instead of the lower density sprawl that could also be happening in unincorporated Mesa County. So really trying to build up the Clifton community area. So this is a summary of the socioeconomic data and person trip mode share. So you can see that the number of vehicles that are being driven alone, it's like the fourth line. Just by making those changes in our model, we had decreased the number of single occupancy vehicles by 3 to 5% in those compliance years. Also decreased a little bit of people even sharing vehicles, but I think the goal was to really lower the VMT and get folks out of their cars. We did see an increase in walking, and I think that was just a lot of that mixed use where it's so close people are able to walk and they don't maybe even feel the need to bike. We didn't have really a change in transit ridership. We did model transit into our plan, but we didn't change the service at all. So that's why the transit ridership really didn't change as part of our plan development. If you go to the next slide. And as a summary, the total vehicle miles traveled has decreased between 200 and 400,000. Vehicle miles traveled, folks are spending less time in their car, and yeah, but that was, I guess, the intent of the greenhouse gas rule was really to get people out of the cars. So we felt like just the changes in our community were able to do that. So if you go to the next slide. This is just a summary of the reduction levels that were required and what we achieved in our model. So we were able to pass the reduction levels for 2030, 2040, and 2050. Next slide. However, we did talk a lot about, as we were going through the process, like if we had to do a mitigation action plan, what would we include in it? We've already been doing a lot of things historically as a community. And as I mentioned, our local partners are already doing a lot of things. So it was more like, what could we take credit for? Because we're already doing so much stuff. So we wanted to just kind of end on the fact that even though we were able to meet those emission reductions, that we still are committed to doing additional things to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So one of those things is increasing frequency of our transit service. We have 1 hour headways on all of our bus routes. We are a 100% CNG fueled transit system, and about 30% of our CNG is net zero emissions. So it comes from the wastewater treatment plant, is piped to our fueling facility. And before we had this system, it was burned off doing nothing, but now it's being used to power our buses. So we are continuously planning to try to increase our frequency in transit service, trying to increase our fleet size, and then also excited about the new state funding for increased transit service. So planning on that change and that increased service. We are also going to be conducting a funding sustainability study for transit and multimodal transportation systems. This year, we received some funding from CDOT for that. Our transit system is funded by FTA and local general funds. We don't have any tax funds going to our transit system. And I think with the multimodal transportation system, it's just part of the general fund also. And so as we build our multimodal system, I think it's also important to look at how to continuously build it, but also how to maintain it. We might also be looking at the busing policies for Mesa County. We have quite large busing radiuses for our schools, which makes it so that most parents are driving their children to school, which then makes it hard to then take other modes of transportation. So looking at all those things as part of this funding sustainability study. We are also planning to seek funding for a travel demand management program. We don't currently have any kind of carpool app or anything out here, but that's something that we think could help also reduce the number of single occupancy vehicles. We did also apply for the CDOT program for the zero emission vehicle transition plan for Grand Valley Transit. So looking at how to optimize that. And then, as I said, a lot of our local partners are also working to improve multimodal corridors. So Mesa County applied for a RAISE grant for Orchard Avenue and received about $22 million for a $25 million project to make Orchard Avenue a kind of east-west multimodal corridor. So a lot of good stuff going on here. And you can do the next slide. We have a pretty small staff here, but wanted to give a shout out to Andrew Gingrich and Rachel Peterson. The three of us worked very hard on this greenhouse gas report, and we're happy with, I think, how it all came together and what we were able to demonstrate. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Dana. Thank you for that excellent presentation. Commissioner Bowman, and then Commissioner Garcia.
Oh, there we go. Now it's on. Dana, this is Commissioner Bowman. I just want to thank you for this fantastic presentation and congratulations on all your successes. I know how hard you all have worked on this. So, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bowman. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. I would concur. Thank you. Great presentation. My question's more for staff. Who is reviewing these reports on our side to verify compliance where they identified they met their goals? Or are we looking into that, verifying the modeling and findings?
Absolutely. I have two members of staff who are in the audience who can answer specific questions. Eric Sabina, the Deputy Director of DTD, and Chris Plantmeyer and Climate Section Manager. So we do that review with them, but we've also been working with not only the Grand Valley MPO, but all of the MPOs throughout this entire process to answer questions regarding the modeling, developing these, and reviewing the results. And additionally, the model itself is reviewed by staff at the Air and Climate Division at CDPHE.
So is there a report or executive summary concurring with findings or any type of analysis?
Yes, when this comes up for adoption by the commission next month, all of that will be in the packet available for review and with a recommendation by staff as well.
All right, thank you. Any other, Commissioner Stewart?
Thank you. Thank you, Dana, for such a good presentation. And I was really impressed with the quality of the report that you provided for us to explain why the changes were happening was a really important factor for me. And the fact that the things that you're doing now, the things that you're continuing to do, and the things that you'll do in the future, a really great report. And thanks very much for bringing that forward. And I know it was a lot of hard work. This is the initial one for GHG, and it's just what I'd hoped for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Next is Vice Chair Adams.
Before I do that, Director Liu has a comment that she wanted to make.
Oh, I'm sorry, Director Liu.
Thanks. I just wanted to chime in sort of similar to what others have said that, there's a lot of very real projects behind the work that Dana and the team are talking about. Jason and myself and many others have spent a lot of time with the team out in Grand Junction, kind of talking through the different parts of what's going on in the city itself, elsewhere in Mesa County. And, the number of years everybody's been working on just the mobility hub, I think, speak to the level of commitment to getting these projects done. And, I know that there's just a very well thought through growth plan in the area that's been, kind of the work of many, many years and many hands. So, just want to give a hat to the team, but vouch for them that they've really been thinking very strategically about how the region grows.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Liu. Vice Chair Adams.
Dana, I echo the comments about, the quality of this presentation. As you were talking, a thought came to mind of what we're seeing today around the country from the business community, and that is people trying to bring people back to work. And some of your data is based on some assumptions about remote work. Have you thought much about what happens if, in fact, people are successful in some of the movements to bring people back into the office? What does that do to this sort of analysis that you guys have put together?
So as I said, like our increase was not as great as some of the other MPOs that I think maybe did theirs closer to the pandemic, where there was like this huge shift into people working from home. That's why I think like we felt like we could justify like about a 15% increase. We don't have, I think the difference between here is we don't have as many office jobs. We don't have as many federal jobs. And so the people that are kind of back in the office are back in the office. Maybe it'll change a little bit, but there's a lot of people that are going about doing their same jobs. That's why it's like, we can't justify that 25% of our community is working from home. So we didn't even try to do that. We tried to use the data for where it's at. And as I said, I think generally the people that are working remotely, some people live here because they can work remotely. A lot of the good jobs are remote jobs. And so unless that shifts where they can no longer work remotely and they have to find a local job, I think that our small increases are reasonable for the 2030 baseline. And then we just did like a 1% increase for 2040 and 2050. So they're not like huge shifts that we're like assuming in our model.
No, thank you. I mean, personally, I'm a believer that sometimes when you change things in the workforce, in spite of what executives think about the ability of mandates and things they suggest, sometimes it doesn't really have the real pull that they expect. So what I hear you saying is you made minimum assumptions of change in the first place, and you don't think that anything that they've suggested is going to alter that too greatly. So I think that's a fine answer. I don't object to it at all. Thank you.
And I'll say one more thing that's interesting here is we don't have the same peaks in traffic as bad as like a lot of urban areas. It's more of like a mesa. So it goes up and it goes flat and it goes down, which I think also kind of leads to the reality that like people are moving around in their work, or there's like retirees who aren't working. And so it's like we don't see those same like AM peaks and PM peaks that I would say Denver sees, with everybody trying to get to the office and then trying to get home. So I think that kind of backs up to like the type of community that we have here and people's how they're working at their jobs.
All right, thanks, Dana. I don't see any other hands up, and I just want to compliment you. I thought that it was an excellent presentation, and I particularly like the information at the tail end of all of the various things that you're not only doing in order to try to meet the minimal requirements, but you're truly committed to the overall goal of improving the efficiency and reducing greenhouse gas. So that's very, very much appreciated. So thank you for your presentation.
Thanks,
today.
Dana.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us on to the next item on the agenda, which is our budget workshop. I'll turn that over to Jeff Sudmeyer and Bethany Nichols.
Good afternoon. We have two topics for today's budget workshop. And actually, I think I'm going to flip their order if that's okay. So the first item is actually the fiscal year 26 budget workshop. So we're going to walk through the fiscal year 26 budget, give you an update there ahead of a request to approve that proposed budget tomorrow. And then we'll come back around to the other item after that, which is a fiscal year 25 budget amendment related to the State Infrastructure Bank. So with that as introduction, I think I'll hand it over to Bethany. She's going to start off the 26 budget and we'll kind of tag team.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, so this will be the final time that you see the FY26 budget before we ask for your review and approval tomorrow to be able to submit it. So I know you've seen it quite a few times, so I won't kind of go into too much detail because we actually haven't made too many changes since last month. So we just are bringing it to you this month to have you review. So next slide, please. As far as agenda, I'll kind of quickly go through those sources and uses charts that you've seen before and also look at that final budget allocation plan. We do want to spend a little bit of time updating you on sort of legislative items, and that's, I'll hand it over to Jeff to kind of talk through that piece. And then we have one slide just to kind of present the estimated roll forward. So we have had a chance to try and estimate what balances we are planning or we're estimating will roll forward into the next fiscal year to be available for budgeting and programming, and then timeline and next steps. Next slide. Okay, so since you saw these charts last month, we've made just a handful of minor updates to revenue and allocations. So we're still anticipating 2.2 billion in revenues in fiscal year 26, and the percentage distributions haven't really changed. So we're still anticipating federal funds to be the largest portion at 36.5%, followed by the highway user tax fund at 30%. And then those other remaining categories, other state funds, legislative initiatives, and CTIO have stayed the same, largely the same as what we presented last month. Next slide. On the allocations side, this chart has not changed significantly in comparison either. So the percentage distributions remaining largely the same. Capital construction, the largest category at 36.6%, followed up by maintenance and operations at 19.6%, and then suballocated programs at 17%. The three smaller categories on the left side making up the remainder of where our FY26 anticipated revenues will be allocated. Next slide. So at this point, we've made all of the updates that we can, given the timing. So the legislature is still in session and making decisions that will impact our budget. But we have updated the narrative and all the appendices, and it's all linked in your packet and posted on the external website. Next slide. So for the one sheet, like I mentioned, we have made some minor updates. As an example, the maintenance program areas were updated to reflect the anticipated need in FY26 for each program area. So the bottom line dollar amount didn't change. We just got the more granular level detail that we built in there from the MLOS program. One of the more notable changes that we made was to the administration line, which increased by 1.5 million. And that was just to account for increases to statewide common policies that were adopted by the JBC during figure setting. That did reduce the remaining surplus of state funds that were allocated to the TC program reserve. But those are just decisions that once they're passed, we kind of have to incorporate into our budget. And we do anticipate seeing additional changes to statewide common policies in the coming weeks. They're still making decisions on a few other categories of those common policies. So we will likely return in July to submit a budget amendment just to align our budget with what the legislature passes. Next slide. This is where I'll hand it over to Jeff to kind of talk a little bit more about the legislature.
Okay, thank you, Bethany. Yes, and I don't think I'm gonna walk through all of the next slides for a couple of reasons. One, it's been a little bit of a moving target. And two, we walked through much of the content with you last month. But just to sort of back up a little bit and reorient ourselves to sort of what's been going on in the legislature with respect to our budget. All the way back in November, we reviewed CDOT decision items that were included in the governor's November 1 budget request. That included two proposals that would result in reductions to planned general fund transfers to CDOT, as well as a permanent and ongoing reduction to the road safety surcharge. We briefed you last month about how we had worked with the Office of State Planning and Budget to identify opportunities to reduce the scope of those reductions, while recognizing, of course, the continued need across state agencies to identify reductions in order to balance the overall state budget. But we were concerned with the level of those initial reductions. So to that end, in coordination with OSPB, we submitted a budget amendment in January that that modified that previous proposal with respect to the level of those reductions. We walked through last month what those changes were. So we made those changes to our budget last month to reflect that updated proposal. We walked through those in detail with you last month. So again, I wasn't going to walk through all of that again today, but the changes that we made last month are summarized at a high level on this slide and reflected an overall improvement in the level of reduction that we were seeing relative to that initial November 1 proposal. So again, the next few slides outline those changes, but again, this has been a moving target. And so I think rather than going through all those slides, I'm going to update you on where we are at today, because a lot has happened since we finalized packet material and sent out that material, most notably as recently as yesterday afternoon. So we've been in front of the JBC twice in the past couple of weeks discussing the budget, the previously proposed reductions, as well as some more recent proposals from the JBC. And I'll just say, given the challenge that the state is facing this session with respect to closing a nearly $1.2 billion budget shortfall, this has been a bit of an exercise in recognizing that we, along with all other state agencies, are going to face reductions. We're seeing that across agencies. It's just a very significant budget shortfall that has to be balanced this year. So it's a little bit of managing expectations. And I will say the things that I might be feeling good about today are very different than the things I might have been feeling good about back in September. So with that as a little bit of the prelude, I want to update you on where we are at with the legislative proposals. So yesterday afternoon, the JBC, after quite a few delays, took action on several of the CDOT related proposals. Again, while I'll say that any cuts are difficult, I think we got a lot of what we were asking for and landed in a place that, we feel like we've got a plan to try to manage. So to summarize and jump right into the JBC decisions that were made yesterday afternoon, our updated proposal that we briefed you on last month included a $64 million reduction to a planned $100 million general fund transfer in fiscal year 26. That is what we brought back to the JBC in January. Subsequent to that, the JBC proposed completely eliminating that transfer entirely. Yesterday, happy to report that they voted to approve our proposal. So that means while we don't get the $100 million general fund transfer, we retain about $36 million of that general fund transfer. And we're actually scheduled to see the amount of that reduction come back to us in later years. So, always take later years with a grain of salt, but at least on paper, we see that reduction come back to us in later years. So I think that was a win there, in seeing that we saw approval of our proposal for the general fund reduction instead of seeing the entire general fund reduction eliminated. I would say probably more significantly, our updated proposal had modified a previous decision item, which would have permanently reduced the faster road safety surcharge. Our revised proposal both reduced the amount of that reduction by about, I think about 2/3, but more importantly, it made that reduction, we asked that reduction be made temporary for only 2 years as opposed to in perpetuity. Recognizing the significant impact that this would have to our core asset management and safety programs, the JBC actually tabled that item entirely. So while they indicated that they could come back to it if they needed to, for now, I think they're hoping to balance the budget without having to reduce the road safety surcharge, and that is great news. That is a big win. That's not just again, the concern with respect to that was not just the implications for the fiscal year 26 budget, but potentially the implications in perpetuity. So both of those, I think, very positive outcomes relative to the potential. Now, that being said, we did see the JBC move forward with a few other reductions that were not originally on the table. First, they voted to eliminate an ongoing $7 million annual general fund transfer to the Revitalizing Main Streets program. So that is a grant program that we administer out of DTD. That will effectively eliminate the funding for that program beginning next fiscal year. Second, they voted to sweep or claw back about 70 million from the Multimodal and Mitigation Options Fund balance. There was a fund balance of nearly 300 million. The most significant driver of that fund balance was a significant amount of infusions that were actually allocated in Senate Bill 21-260. We got a lot of upfront general fund and ARPA federal stimulus allocated by Senate Bill 260, and those dollars have been slow, for a variety of reasons, slow to go out the door, slow to spend. Now, the majority of those dollars are allocated out by the MPOs and TPRs to local projects. So we will be working to the best of our ability, I'll say, to keep MMOF projects that are currently underway, to keep those moving forward. And make sure that those projects that are in construction or soon to be in construction can continue to move forward. And then I think we'll need to work to really review project status and work with partners to identify if and how we need to delay projects, push projects out, push awards in future years out to reconstrain that program to the reduced amount of funding that is available. So we definitely have some work to do there, but again, we will do, I think, our best to try to minimize the impacts and do our best to certainly make sure that those projects that are far along continue to move forward. So now I want to say, I was going to ask, I wanted to move this up so Emily Hadaway could join us because I wanted to see if she had anything she wanted to add, since she has been very closely involved in tracking this with the legislature and working with Bethany's team and working with the JBC staff. But Emily unfortunately had to hop off to go to another meeting, but I did want to just give her a shout out for the work she's done working with the JBC. I also wanted to note that, and this is another reason why we're not rushing to make changes to the budget before you approve it tomorrow. Even though we have these decisions from the JBC, they're still not final legislative decisions. So, while the JBC voted to approve these items, we could still see changes before the end of the legislative session. The JBC decisions will essentially result in the first draft of the long bill or the state budget, but that still has to be introduced in the legislature probably in early April. It needs to go through committees and it needs to pass both the House and Senate. So we could still see changes to what the JBC proposed. That being said, JBC action is very significant. That is the basis of the starting point for the state budget. So I would say that, that being the case, and recognizing that that we have required budget submission deadlines to meet, we're not updating the budget to reflect these changes. It will be as we discussed last month. We'll ask you to approve it tomorrow, and then we will be back no matter what in July at the start of the fiscal year to amend the budget to sync up with any final changes coming out of the legislative session. And just to sort of wrap up this piece at a high level and summarize sort of if things end up exactly where they are today, what changes do we have to make to the budget in July? Well, one, we will see the faster road safety surcharge reduction that is currently built in. We'll see that faster revenue loss restored. So we would actually see we'd see our faster safety program and our asset management program allocations come back up to basically go back to where we started, to go back to the planned or forecasted levels and fully fund those programs. That's great. The general fund, what's reflected is already what we had, what the JBC did, so no changes there. We would have 2 additional changes to make to the MMOF, I believe, and the RMS allocations to reflect those 2 items if they make it through the final legislative session. So I think based on that, let's skip ahead. I'm gonna pause there and maybe see if there's any questions before I hand it back to Bethany to maybe walk us through the last couple of slides. So.
All right, questions. Looks like we have a few. So we'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Cook and then Commissioner Bowman. Did I see your hand up too, or Commissioner Garcia? Gotcha. Okay, Commissioner Cook.
No, just really quickly to make sure I understand. So is the general fund transfer reduction at 39 million per the November 1 decision item, or is it 64, which is what we had offered, I think, in January?
Good question, and a little bit confusing because our revised proposal in January actually increased the general fund reduction. The reason we increased it though, however, was because we kind of said, hey, how about we increase our general fund reduction this much, but then reduce our faster reduction this much. So in net with faster, we did ask them to increase our general fund reduction, but take faster down by more. The JBC, after we submitted that, said, well, how about we just eliminate it entirely next fiscal year? And so where we landed was actually back to what we proposed in January. So the $64 million reduction that we asked for in January is what they ultimately approved yesterday.
Still really good news. So thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. Good news on those fronts for sure, but I'm troubled about the MMOF reduction. And can you repeat the amount that they swept from our MMOF fund, please?
Sure. It was about 71 million would be the balance. And I think I'm speaking in pretty rough numbers right now, but I think the overall fund balance across, there's actually multiple MMOF funds, is about 300 million. So that just to kind of put it in context of the overall fund balance.
And so the changes, thank you for that number, but the changes you're saying are the work that's needed. Can you elaborate on that? It sounds like JBC saw those funds there and swept them because we're not getting them out the door to our various projects. Is that correct?
And I see, I'll let Director Liu, I think wants to jump in here with a few comments. So I'll let her go first if that's okay with the chair.
Yeah, I think on those funds, first of all, these have always been some of the slowest funds to deliver because of the way it was written into Senate Bill 21-260. It was not a process that has moved very fast, created a lot of recipients and subrecipients. So there is a balance that hasn't been fully spent down yet because of the sort of the nature of how it was constructed. And I think, in subsequent years of legislation, there have been more efficient ways to get money to operations and maintenance in particular, which, at the time was one of the things that they were trying to achieve with the MMOF tranche. Like the sponsor, asks us at least once, if not twice a year, why those funds weren't spent on operations and maintenance. And it was because it wasn't really optimized for, I think, some of the legislative intent. So, I think this wasn't initially our idea, but in a world where lots of things are getting cut, we were able to, we think, successfully negotiate to limit the total damage to CDOT, and OSPB was very helpful in kind of pushing back on them that if they pulled from a different place, they needed to restore some of the funds that had been in play prior. And I think being able to mitigate the potential issues with faster safety, is a big deal. And is something that I think I have not seen a lot of other sort of backs and forths succeed in that manner in the JBC process. So I think, it doesn't, we were not going to get held harmless in this process because everybody's getting cut. But I think that the fact that many people across the administration were able to counter, having cuts added to one another and sort of layered on top of each other, is about as well as anything is going in this process. And, in terms of the MMOF, they actually started asking about a much bigger number, and we were able to kind of show them that, what was it, Jeff, $100 and some odd million in funds that were not fully spent down were committed enough that they shouldn't touch them.
Yeah, that's correct. So to Director Liu's point, I think originally, that the target was much bigger. I mentioned over
was like
nearly $300 million fund balance. I think they had their eyes on more of that. I think we tried to do some analysis of sort of the level of what projects were advanced to what stage and had funds encumbered, and tried to work with them to identify a number that would hopefully be more manageable in terms of trying to make sure that those projects that were encumbered and had encumbered funds and were underway or soon to be underway could keep moving forward. So I think, again, in the context here is sort of, we're not happy to see any type of reductions, but that was certainly not what we knew we could expect at any point in time. So it was really trying to minimize the harm.
Right. No cuts wasn't going to happen. And
So a follow-up to that question, thank you. You mentioned in July that we got to come back and make some adjustments there. So are we going to go back to the TPRs and others to identify what MMOF projects are going to be affected? And, you know, they're in that process right now, trying to prioritize MMOF projects. And it's just a little troubling to be going through a process and yet seeing a reduction in funding. So can you elaborate on next steps there, please?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it is a challenge, right? It's a challenge to kind of be in the middle of planning and award cycles and things when you've got the funding changing as you go. And we're, you know, frankly, we're seeing that in a whole lot of different places across different programs, state funds, federal funds. I know I'm looking at Kay because I know she's been seeing that with some of her challenges with some of her programs. So agree, not ideal. That we have to do that, and I'll say we still have uncertainty and probably will until, you know, from the state funds perspective, at least until we have the long bill passed. Now that being said, I think what, you know, we'll probably be trying to do is to really work with DTD to really dig in on some of the status of those MMOF projects. A lot of those projects are still not ready to go to construction. Some of them are not contracted yet. Some of them are in design phases. So I think some of those, it's you know, don't necessarily need the funds right now, a large amount of the funds right now anyway. And so I think we'll be looking to sort of see to what extent can we preserve things by maybe just by pushing awards out. And I think that's what we're probably going to have to work with over the next few months. And I think to the extent that it requires us to do some changing to our prioritization of projects with the TPRs, then yes, I would expect that we probably have some level of consultation. I think if we have to make some choices about what the priorities are, because some things get pushed out, I would think we would probably want the planning partner input on that, since you're the ones that made those selections.
All right, thank you. Other comments, questions? Commissioner Stewart.
I've been watching the process at JBC. And you did say last time when I was unhappy about the budget that you were going to work as hard as you could to backfill as much as you could. I'm amazed by the work because it's not what I'd like to see, but it's way better than what we were faced with. And I guess that's a call out to all of you who were so diligent, and Emily, and I know Shoshana and the rest of you, Jeff and Brittany, you've all been up there trying to, it's not just us, you know, it's everybody's taking these cuts. And a few phone calls I made, I realized, you know, we're just one in the pipeline of all these other agencies who have really important projects as well that don't want to be cut, and there's got to be cuts somewhere. So Shoshana, I just want to thank you for your hard work on this.
Thanks. And, you know, just for everyone's awareness, some combination of us testified 3 times on this. You know, that has never happened in our JPC interactions. And, you know, Emily's been sitting there for days, you know, working behind the scenes on the presentations that the staffer did with Jeff and others. And, you know, I think OSPB really swung hard for us at the end of the day. You know, when Mark Ferrandino testified last week, he was very, very supportive of making sure that they did not take too many pounds of flesh from us. So, you know, I think people are pushing as hard as we possibly could in this budget year. And, you know, I think, you know, I do not think we've left any efforts on the table, or that our partners elsewhere in the administration have.
And yeah, and I want to echo that. Thank you so much. This is a very difficult conversation, obviously statewide, and specifically for us when we, you know, I just worry about the disconnect between the complexity of what we're trying to deal with the legislature, and to what degree the public actually understands what this is all about and what's causing all of this. And the fact that the public, we constantly hear from them issues about trying to find out a way to increase our maintenance, increase our capital construction, increase our multimodal transportation. And yet we're having to have this very conversation to potentially do just the opposite. And so this is something, obviously, it's not new this year. It's been going on for a long time, so I won't get completely on my soapbox about this, but it is a structural problem with the entire state of Colorado, the way we fund government. And I would just really like to, as a citizen, like to see the legislature start to take that serious and start to tackle it. In the meantime, we have our wonderful staff working like crazy trying to make the ends meet. So it's very, very much appreciated. I always get a kick out of the fact that we're going to be asked tomorrow to adopt basically what's our final budget, and it's nowhere near our final budget, and we all know that. So we'll do the best we can, and I think that everyone, at least here, understands the reality of what we are doing tomorrow and how it fits into that bigger picture, which is the discussion that is going on with the legislature, and the legislature is having to struggle with a very difficult year and a lot of very difficult issues, and we are part of the bigger mix. So thank you for that. And Jeff, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, and I was just going to say, when on this subject, before we move on to the next, we do have just a couple more slides, but obviously I think this discussion about the legislative impacts was really the big news of the workshop, so I wanted to make sure we had time for discussion before we wrapped up. But if you don't have any further questions on that portion, then I'd probably ask Jamie to move forward a couple slides. I think there's maybe the roll forward slide, and then I'm going to hand it back to Bethany to finish this off here.
That'd be fine.
Yeah, so just to round out kind of the last piece of the budget is the roll forwards. So we've done our best to kind of estimate year-end roll forwards to give you a complete picture of budget that's available for planning and programming in FY26. So for most programs, we kind of just used a straight line projection methodology to try and estimate what we thought would, be those, using year-to-date encumbrances, what we thought would be those balances rolling forward. So we're estimating about 1.6 billion will be available, and that would bring us to having a total budget of about 3.8 billion in including CDOT and the enterprises in FY26. Of course, the majority of rolled forward funds are programmed and committed, but just have not yet been budgeted or encumbered in contracts. Next slide. And I think that kind of ends our FY26 budget. And I think just for next steps, we've kind of mentioned that, we'll look for a vote tomorrow to approve so we can submit the budget by the statutory deadline to get the governor's signature and be able to kind of push the budget into the financial system. And then we'll return in July to amend it. So that's FY26. We do have an FY25 budget amendment to bring to you. We just have one item, so we might switch to talk about that. We are bringing a request to you to transfer funds between the Highway State Infrastructure Bank Fund and the Aeronautics Infrastructure Bank Fund in order to be able to fully fund a loan request. So we were going to talk to you about that. Next slide. So I'll just give you a little bit of background on the project and the loan application and then kind of discuss how we are in this situation. So next slide. All right, so we have had a loan application come in from the Grand Junction Airport for $6.5 million. There are two pieces to this project. $4.5 million is for the construction of a 350 space parking lot south of the airport's existing lots, along with completion of drainage improvements needed for it and some future lots based on the airport's master development plan. $2 million is for construction of covered close-in parking in front of the airport terminal with some solar panels that can serve as direct power source for the terminal and also provide some power to XL. So electric vehicle chargers are also going to be added. In reviewing the application, staff have determined that actually both components are eligible under both the highway and the aeronautics programs, but unfortunately neither program has enough funding. So next slide. So that being said, you can see here the balances in each of those accounts. So with the aeronautics account, there's currently 1.5 million available. We are anticipating seeing some loan payments come back in of 1.3 million prior to the issuance of this loan. So that would allow us to have 2.8 million available. but still, we would be $3.7 million short. The next slide. So here looking at the highway SIB account, we currently have $4.9 million available. So what we're asking today is to be able to transfer that 3.7 million of the highway SIB account funds to the aeronautics account to be able to fully fund this loan. And we would plan, once we start receiving those payments back, to transfer the funds back into the highway side to keep the balance correct in each account. But we kind of wanted to do this to facilitate the loan and have the ability to approve it as one loan package. Next slide. So, you know, if you're amenable to that, what we would do then after tomorrow would be to just make the transaction. But with that, I'll kind of pause and take questions.
Vice Chair Adams.
Bethany, just a quick question on, I don't understand or know much about the airport over there, but my familiarity with airports in general is that frequently they are municipal entities and a lot of their expenses and capital construction activities are funded through their own initiative, either bonds or other aspects. So why is this one something that CDOT, or is it just a loan and we're going to get repaid back? So I'm not exactly sure what the transaction is here and why CDOT versus something that if it's an authority or whatever they operate as, why isn't it something they would be covering themselves?
So it is a loan program. So the funds, the loan, it's a revolving account. So the program is run to be kind of funding made available to airports as part of a broader package of funds. So they're bringing other funds to the table and looking for just an instrument to use to be able to completely fund the construction package. So it is just a loan, and then that interest goes back into the account along with the principal, and over time, we're able to do more and more. And it's really a program that's just meant to facilitate and support kind of all of these different airports. And it just so happens that Grand Junction has put in this application. Mm-hmm. Correct.
Commissioner Garcia.
Just a quick question on the solar piece. Are there any rebates that they might be able to qualify for there with the addition of solar?
That is a question I would not be able to answer. I don't know the answer to that question.
Just something maybe to consider. There are solar credits out there, or solar rebates, but I don't know if this project will qualify. But assuming the current administration will keep those in place, they can add up to as much as 30% in rebate. So just a thought. I'm sure they looked at it, but it was just a question.
Yeah, I can definitely take that back and have that discussion. Yeah.
Okay, and I see Commissioner Parsons has got her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just have another question kind of on how it works. How often do we get loan requests through the State Infrastructure Bank like this? I was just curious.
That's a good question. I think, I mean, generally speaking, maybe one a year or a couple. It really varies over time, I think.
Yeah, and I would say that there's two accounts. There's the highway account and the aviation account. I would say the highway account is not heavily utilized. I would have to look, but I think there's two outstanding loans right now, and I think they're both quite several years old. So we have not received loan applications in several years, I don't think, from the highway account. The aeronautics account, though, I would say we see loans on, the aeronautics account is a much bigger balance. It's much more capitalized, but we see, I would say, I don't know, at least a year, one or two, and sometimes they come in the form of this where there's eligibility on both sides, but a lot more activity in the aeronautics SIB.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, and so Jeff and Bethany, that then concludes your part of the presentation. Thank you. And I noticed that you said you're asking for us to do it today, but we're actually meaning to do it tomorrow, correct? Okay, just make sure. All right, thank you. That's got us scheduled to 2:30. We're actually a little bit ahead of the schedule. We do have a break scheduled right now, and if it's acceptable to everybody, I think I would like to take a break. And why don't we take about a 10-minute break? Let's get back about what, 2:25 if we could. Thank you. All right. All right, welcome back. We'll go ahead and come back to the workshops for the Colorado Transportation Commission. Next item on the agenda is the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise Workshop. And I will call on Patrick Halinda for that. Patrick? There it is.
Good afternoon, directors. I'll just hold here for a second while we get the presentation up on screen.
Is your mic on? I don't think I can hear.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. So while we're pulling up the slide deck here, I'll just get started with an introduction. So we're here with you today to present a third workshop on the upcoming Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise financing in as many months. So just a brief recap on how we got here. We had a January workshop to provide a high-level overview of the transaction. Last month, we did a deeper dive into structuring alternatives for this transaction. And this month, we're bringing you a final summary for the upcoming Series 2025A revenue bond transaction in advance of seeking your approval to move forward during the board meeting tomorrow. Next slide, please. Oh, could you go back one, Jamie? Thank you. So here's our agenda for today. We'll touch on several key financing documents. These have all been included in your packet via a link to Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise's external website. We'll provide updates on the transaction status as well as an overview of the essentially the size, timing, and purpose of the transaction. We'll review the transaction structure that we workshopped with this group last month, touch on a few other considerations as well as some ongoing activities. Discuss the parameters that will be included in the approving resolution that you'll be presented tomorrow, and close the discussion on schedule. Next slide, please. So diving into our key financing documents, and again, these are all available in the packet via a link to our website. The first document we wanted to touch on today is the preliminary official statement. This is a disclosure document that's typically released 7 to 10 days before the sale of the bonds. This contains preliminary information on the terms and conditions of the bond sale, including purpose, security features, and disclosures that may be applicable to the issue. So as we progress through the slide deck, we'll be covering a number of the pertinent items that are covered in our preliminary official statement. Next slide, please. The next document you were provided was the supplemental bond indenture. This is a contract between the enterprise and our trustee, who's Zions Bank. So the trustee is an intermediary between the issuer and our investors. So this indenture essentially ensures that certain revenues are pledged as repayment for the bonds, so establishing security for repayment. As we've discussed in past months, the primary pledge for repayment is our bridge safety surcharge. We also have a conditional pledge on our bridge and tunnel impact fee and bridge and tunnel retail delivery fee. And this is contingent on there being a successful or favorable outcome on the Americans for Prosperity lawsuit. So if findings were in favor of the bridge and tunnel enterprise. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have the bond parameters resolution. So essentially what this document is doing is providing authorization for Executive Director Liu or any of the members of the board to essentially do two things. So first is to execute any documents related to the financing, and then establishing the terms for the transaction within certain not to exceed parameters. And again, we'll touch on those parameters a bit later in the workshop. And one of the key documents that the signatory will be signing is the bond purchase agreement. So this is our agreement between the issuer and our underwriters. So this is the team that is marketing and selling the bonds for us and establishing the terms of the bond sale. So as I mentioned, the parameters resolution will be presented to you at this month's meeting for approval. Next slide, please. So a few updates on the transaction since we last spoke. So first, the ratings process with Moody's, S&P, and Kroll has concluded, and we did receive final ratings just in the last 2 days. So Moody's rated the infrastructure revenue bond credit from Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise as a A1 stable. Kroll rated us as an A+ stable, and S&P rated us as an A. So I did want to take a moment to focus on the A rating from S&P. So when we issued our inaugural Series 2024A infrastructure revenue bonds last year, we were rated an A-. So this represents a 1-notch improvement in our rating. So that is in part due to the active management of our debt portfolio. So this entire group was along for the ride with us as we refinanced or refunded our remaining outstanding Series 2010A Build America bonds late last year. So that certainly helped improve our coverage. And we've certainly been working to, balance our borrowing needs, our ongoing pay-go capacity, and certainly being mindful of our coverage. So that's a achievement we're proud of as an enterprise. So just wanted to point that out to the group. Now that we have ratings, we're now able to move forward with getting bond insurance bids. So we did get bids from both Assured Guaranty and Build America Mutual. As I mentioned, the draft of the financing documents that I just reviewed with you are complete and available for your review if you'd like to do a deeper dive. And subject to board approval of the parameters resolution, the preliminary official statement will be posted on Friday, March 21st with Executive Director Liu's approval. Next slide, please. So this is a overview of the transaction, just again touching on our general plan of finance and then the goals for this specific transaction. So the Series 2025A bonds, we refer to those as the infrastructure revenue bonds throughout this presentation as they're being issued under our infrastructure revenue bond indenture. These are the second of 3 contemplated tranches or issuances that total an estimated $400 to $500 million in par that are being used to fund the CDOT 10-year plan and address BTE's funding gap, allowing us to deliver all of our 10-year plan commitments timely. So the goal of this specific transaction was to issue bonds to generate a project fund of $225 million over a 30-year term. This was determined based on our construction funding needs in calendar year 2025. So with that in mind, just did want to note that the majority, if not all of these bond proceeds are expected to be budgeted to the CDOT 10-year plan within a month of closing, pending your approval of a budget supplement tomorrow for Floyd Hill Construction Package 4. So last month, Kurt and the Region 1 management team provided you with an in-depth presentation on the Floyd Hill project, status of the project, and the financials. So to fully fund Construction Package 4, you'll see a budget supplement tomorrow for $240 million of BTE funds that will be funded through this transaction. And finally, we did discuss this in depth in the workshop last month, but we are planning to issue the bonds with a 9-year par call option, which will be aligned with the call date of the Series 2024A infrastructure revenue bonds. And what this does at a future point in time, future Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise Management and the future board will have the opportunity to potentially refund these bonds, whether it be for debt service savings, if there's a favorable interest rate environment at that time, or for structural purposes if the needs of the enterprise change. So if they need more pay-as-you-go program capacity, or if they're able to accelerate the pay down of the debt. Next slide, please. A few notes on the transaction structure. The transaction structure we selected is in line with what we discussed with you last month. We referred to this as our modified wrap structure. So in developing this structure, we're really looking to balance our capital program needs while meeting our additional bonds test and managing our pay-as-you-go program capacity. So we've listed our additional bonds test here for reference. Just so everybody's aware, this was established last year when we established the working lien and the infrastructure revenue bond indenture. So essentially what it's looking at is a ratio of the revenues that are available to pay debt on the infrastructure revenue bonds over the maximum annual debt service we pay in any given year. So essentially we are maintaining that 1.5 coverage based on our bridge safety surcharge alone. So this does not include our bridge and tunnel impact fees, as I mentioned earlier. We have interest-only payments through fiscal year 2029. This allows us to navigate a time period in which we have a heightened level of program delivery due to the number of large 10-year plan projects that are flowing through the program, such as Floyd Hill, I-270, Vale Pass. So we have a total, we actually revisited the list yesterday, 47 bridges and a number of tunnel projects occurring at each AMT that are included in the 10-year capital plan. And then, as I mentioned, we are moving forward with the RAP structure. So we amortize principal beginning in fiscal year 2030 and through fiscal year 2051, we amortize about half the principal, and then the remaining principal is amortized between fiscal year 2052 and 2055. So again, the reason or rationale for some of the backloading is that a number of our existing debt service obligations are met and paid off and reach final maturity in fiscal year 2052 and prior to that. So we do have quite a bit of additional capacity in those final 3 years. And as I mentioned, with that par call option, there will be the option to refinance this issuance in the future for restructuring purposes if there is a need to based on program needs at that time. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a detailed amortization schedule and high-level statistics for the upcoming financing. So again, this reflects that RAP structure. And I'll just walk through the statistics here. As I mentioned, the proceeds will be used to finance our designated bridge projects. Again, this particular transaction will be focused on Floyd Hill. We're expecting to issue the bonds with a 30-year term. This creates a project fund of $225 million, resulting in total repayment of $461 million, maximum annual debt service at just over $30 million. If you look at the far right-hand column on the table, you'll see that those larger debt service payments are occurring between 2052 and 2055, when we do have quite a bit of additional program capacity. With the 30-year term, final maturity would occur on December 1st, 2054. So we are anticipating that the bonds will be premium bonds. So essentially they'll be sold at above the face value of the bonds. So the principal balance is about $208 million with premium that allows us to achieve that project fund of $225 million. So I guess I say all this with the caveat that there is quite a bit of volatility in the market at the current point in time. So there certainly is the potential that the financials could change a bit in the coming months in between your approval of the resolution and when we actually price and close the bonds. Just one other note here, our underwriting syndicate. So again, this is the group that assists us with the marketing and selling of the bonds. Our senior running book manager is JP Morgan for the transaction, and you can see the rest of the syndicate here on the slide. Next slide, please. So a few other considerations related to the transaction. So I mentioned that we did solicit bond insurance quotes. So both bond insurers that we've spoken with carry AA ratings. So this would wrap our underlying single A credit, resulting in lower borrowing costs. So what we will be taking on is doing a break even to determine if the lower debt service offsets the cost of the insurance policy. So we have received the quotes, but I do not have a break even to share with you. I believe I should be able to provide that to you prior to your approval of the resolution tomorrow. That's still ongoing as we just got the ratings in the last 2 days. So quite a few moving parts at the moment. So regarding interest rates, so just wanted to make a general comment that everyone in the room is likely aware that interest rates have increased over the past several years, but municipal interest rates still remain within their 10-year historical average. So it is a good time to be in the market. The next slide will go through, provide a little bit more context for this. And then regarding timing, again, just reiterating that the timing of this transaction really is driven by the timing of expenditures for our calendar year 2025 construction projects. Next slide, please. So this slide does have quite a bit of information on it, quite a bit to digest, but I'll try to walk you through it the best I can here. So this is again illustrating the current interest rate environment. So what you're looking at is the 30-year MMD curve. So this is essentially the yield you'd anticipate for a 30-year municipal bond. So very similar to what we'd be issuing here at a AA credit, assuming we wrapped it with insurance. We've also overlaid market activity from CDOT and the enterprises over top of this. So you can see the interest rate at various points in time when CDOT or the enterprises have been in the market. So really two takeaways here, again, is that while interest rates have increased and you can see the uptick there from historic lows, we still are within a 10-year historic average. And currently interest rates are in line when we have been at the market recently as well. Next slide, please. So these are the proposed parameters that are included in the resolution that you'll be approving, or not approving, but asked to approve tomorrow. So the maximum par amount is set at $250 million. So this allows for the flexibility to issue discount bonds to generate a $225 million project fund. So the scenario I showed you earlier, we're currently under the assumption that we'll be issuing premium bonds based on current market conditions. So in determining these parameters, we work closely with our advisors to really make sure we've provided enough flexibility to account for a range of outcomes. So that's why you see a maximum par amount that is actually over the target project fund that we're looking to generate. We've also provided an additional year of cushion to extend the bonds from the proposed debt service schedule that you saw in the amortization schedule I had up earlier. So I did want to make the point that the term discount bonds can be a little bit misleading. So generally what this would indicate is that the coupon or interest rate that we're paying on those bonds is below essentially what the market is at. So therefore, we're selling them at a lower face value. It doesn't necessarily indicate that we are paying more debt service. So in this instance, we're targeting a specific project fund. So regardless if there's a discount or a premium, it may not have a material impact on how much debt service we're paying. So just wanted to, I think there could be a negative perception that went along with the term discount. So I wanted to address that. Next slide, please. And then finally, just closing on an overview of the timeline for the transaction. So you can see between November and February, we've graded this out. These are all the key events or key milestones that we've completed. Moving forward towards this transaction, the next step is to put the parameters resolution in front of you tomorrow and request your approval. With your approval, that allows us to move forward with posting the preliminary official statement. And again, that would be with Director Liu's approval. And then that sets us up in April for pricing and closing. And then by late April, early May, we'll need those funds for construction of our calendar year 2025 construction projects. And that concludes my presentation for today. I will turn it back over to the chair for any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Are there any questions for Patrick? Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. Good presentation, Patrick. With the volatility that's going on, any speculation where the rate might go, if it goes anywhere?
Yeah, I guess I don't have too much insight to that. I would say that there has been some upward movement in the municipal market data curve, even since the graphic I displayed here today was published. So there is certainly the potential that that behavior could continue. I will note that right now the pricing for the bonds is scheduled for April 8th. So at that point in time, essentially, the financials for this particular transaction would be locked in. So not too much time between now and April 8th. So we're only looking at about 2 weeks.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Any other? Commissioner Gutierrez.
Just a quick question, and I'm assuming that, I know that we've used COPs in the past. Street bank loans, this has to have been the most advantageous way to go. Is that, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of late to the party here. So if it's a redundant question, I apologize.
No, that's a great question, and I think we answered this again in a number of workshops over the past year. But really, at the time we set out and structured our plan of finance, we were looking at really how to balance our short-term borrowing needs versus the ability to provide a long-term sustainable funding source for our bridges and tunnels. And there's really a myriad of factors that sent us down this path. And I think one was that really with the amount that we're borrowing, right, and the size of our annual program, it is difficult to generate a large amount of proceeds without taking too deep of a cut out of the program with respect to debt service for a short-term issuance. Another factor that we considered is that really at the current point in time is that we're not seeing too significant of an advantage of going with a shorter term, right, from an interest rate perspective. So there still is some advantage, but not as much as there has been in the past because the yield curve is relatively flat. And finally, I will say that part of the concept of structuring this plan of finance, so we have multiple issuances, is that it does allow us those points to stop and check in prior to each issuance. And as I mentioned, this is the second of three. And we're still potentially evaluating a third transaction in 2026 or 2027, which at this point in time, we do anticipate being much smaller. So we will be looking at that larger range of options at that point in time, just based on market conditions and what our borrowing needs are.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, Patrick, thank you. Appreciate it. Takes us to the next item, which is the statewide plan update with Darius Pevas. Darius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, commissioners, for the time today. We wanted to give a quick update on some of the activities in regards to the statewide plan development. And today I have Marissa Gahan, the multimodal planning branch manager, to go over some of the items today, including some of the planned activities later on in April in terms of potential town halls with the commission and some of the other activities. So I'm going to turn over the first part of the presentation to Marissa to start us off.
Awesome. Thanks, Darius. Let me go to the next slide. So I have a few key public engagement opportunities coming up that I wanted to make you all aware of. The first one being our telephone town halls, which will play a central role in. Some of you have participated in these before, so they'll be something that you're familiar with. Some of you have not, and this will be brand new. So we're here to walk you through what telephone town halls are and the role that you'll play in those and how they'll inform our statewide plan and then later on our 10-year plan. And then another companion to the telephone town halls is our public survey. Those will work hand in hand to make sure that we're hearing the voices of Colorado and we're considering them in our planning process. After I get through that, I'll turn it back to Darius to talk about the 10-year plan. So again, as part of our development of our long-range plans and our 10-year plan, we look to engage the public, and we'll be doing a series of telephone town halls, again, to hear directly from the people of Colorado and provide a venue for the people to speak directly with their with you all as their transportation commissioners for each area of the state. Again, they're forums, kind of like a radio talk show where the public can speak directly to you and ask questions and receive answers. Next slide. So each time we do these for the statewide plan, we do them roughly every 4 to 5 years, but the technology gets better each time. So now we do have the ability to call both mobile phones and landlines. I know people with landlines is getting less and less each year. So it's exciting that we'll be able to call mobile phones this time, reach more people. We also have, we'll have on our webpage instructions for how people can participate and sign up and send links out to, friends, family, neighbors, anyone and everyone that's hoping to participate. We'll also have Spanish language interpretation available as part of these town hall features as well. Go to the next slide. So I think I've been over this, but what we will have the ability to kind of have for you to introduce some of the important issues happening in your areas of the state, kind of talk a little bit about the statewide plan goals of advancing transportation safety, fixing our roads, and sustainably increasing transportation choice. And then really the bulk of the telephone town hall will be people calling in, and the vendor will be able to screen people that call in or are able to virtually ask questions. So we'll screen the questions, and then we will have staff and the RTDs available, and Herman will be there too to answer questions as after they're screened and come in. So these in the past have been really informative. I think they've been a really helpful way to get input directly and reach a lot of people. I'm going to go to the next slide. Oh, great. Perfect timing, Darius. So we have a schedule that went out in your packet, which is a little aggressive because we're still trying to get the venue procured, which should be any day now. So we have another schedule that Darius just handed out. Maybe this is the new schedule, but we're still trying to figure out what dates would be best for each district to hold the telephone town hall. So the dates that went in your packet have shifted a little bit. These are still drafts, so we'll still want to work with you to make sure that these dates do in fact work with your schedule. But here's just some times that we've put together to react to. I don't know if you want to add to that, Darius.
Yeah, I'd say these are draft times on here, and I think there'll probably be some reach out from either DTD staff or Office of Policy and Government Relations staff to work out specifics with the schedule. So, trying to schedule 9 of these over the next month and a half is going to be a little bit of a logistic puzzle to work with, and working with our partners in the regions in order to determine when those would best be. So probably we'll have further conversations as we try to nail down this schedule, and then further conversations on the logistics as well. So I just wanted to add that in, that this may change as we get closer to these dates.
Other questions?
On the telephone town halls specifically, well, thanks. First of all, this would be really, really cool and informative, I think. For Denver, I was wondering if it might be better to relabel it. Jeffco, for example, goes all the way to Boulder County or Broomfield, and then also all the way south to the southern edge of Douglas. So where do you put it? And I thought it might be confusing to people who are deciding which one they belong to. What if you just said Denver Metro A and then list the counties that are included, and Denver Metro B and then those counties or something? That was an idea.
Thank you, Commissioner Cook, for the suggestion. I think when we actually advertise it, we'll probably want to be more specific with how we have it on there, knowing that there might be different needs depending on which parts of the metro areas are. And I know District 2 and District 1 in particular, there might be separations between the northern and southern parts of those counties. But since those are later on in the agenda, as we work through that, we can make sure that it's advertised appropriately so folks know which one to go to.
You want to go to the next slide? Just a little bit about a survey that we're planning to launch around the same times as the telephone town hall, so we can get that input to also inform our planning processes. We will have a statewide survey. It is going to be a pretty short and sweet survey, really trying to hear about directly about the themes from PD 14 and our statewide plan goals, about safety again, fixing our roads, and transportation choice. Since the appetite is not the best for taking surveys right now, we did again want to keep it pretty short and concise, but we'll also feature a funding question that allow people to allocate a hypothetical budget to various transportation options. We did send a draft of this survey out to members of the staff earlier this week to review. And so we'll make sure to incorporate any of their input as it makes sense into the survey before we launch it. Is there anything else you want to say, Darius?
I think that's about covers it. If there's any questions before we go to the next part of the workshop.
Thank you.
Right, any questions on this part?
All right. Next slide, please. So as we're finishing up working with our rural planning partners, the focus is going to be on development of the next version of the 10-year plan. And we've had talks about the goals, and we had talks about the potential planning totals that are going to be available in previous workshops. But that's probably going to be some of the next stuff that staff is going to be working on in coordination with our local planning partners as well. And in terms of the 10-year plan, based off of the direction that's been given through the Policy Directive 14 and the workshops with the commission, looking at projects adding to the 10-year plan that focus on the 3 goal areas of fixing our roads, making transportation safer, and increasing transportation choice. And also we want to focus on continuing to be accountable and transparent, and continuing some of the initiatives that happened with the previous 10-year plan. So all of our stakeholders and the public are aware of the development of these projects and what's going on as these projects are going out on the street.
Darius, if we can pause there, we have a
Yes,
question, Commissioner
Thanks,
Stewart.
Darius. What does quality over quantity mean?
I think we want to make sure that we have projects that are able to meet multiple goal areas and meet the goals that are outlined by both the TPRs and by the Transportation Commission, instead of trying to incorporate as many projects as we can into the plan. So knowing that we do have a financial constraint in the potential planning totals, that may be a consideration when we're developing this plan going forward as we go through this process.
Is there something else you can say besides quality over quantity? That's very ambiguous. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but that's pretty ambiguous. So if we want, we should say what we mean.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll look at revising the language. Okay. You go on to the next slide, please. These slides should be familiar. These are slides that were developed during the discussion of Policy Directive 14, and looking at the goals that were adopted by PD 14, which includes advancing transportation safety, fixing our roadways, and sustainably increasing transportation choice. So these are going to be the guiding principles for the development of the next statewide plan and the next 10-year plan. Next slide, please. In terms of advancing transportation safety, as was passed by the commission in September, looking at metrics to reduce the amount of traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries in half from current levels through the end of the plan, and have a consideration in terms of the impact of vulnerable road users. Next slide, please. In terms of fixing our roads, the goals that were passed by the commission in September of 2024, includes looking at improving poor interstate pavement throughout the state, ensuring that the state highway drivability life, our main metric for determining the health of the highway system, is at 80% high or moderate for all of our roadways, and ensuring that the bridges in the state are no more than 5% of them are in poor condition. And then finally, next slide, please. In terms of sustainably increasing transportation choice, looking at goals of increasing the amount of transit service that is provided in the state, including our local transit partners throughout the length of the plan, achieving a 1% annual reduction in VMT per capita, and achieving the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in line with the greenhouse gas reduction roadmap from the administration. Next slide, please. So in terms of goal advancement, looking at, as we develop this, potential projects that could be included to be added into the plan, could be taking a look at in terms of safety, targeted safety focusing improvements, identifying locations that have potential for crash reduction in high and moderate corridors that have high and moderate crash incidents, in terms of fixing our roadways, looking at making efforts to improve our poor assets or the assets that are going to become poor over the next decade through a worst first approach. And then finally, in sustainably increasing transportation choice, focusing on new projects that will focus on alternatives, including addressing interregional transit gaps and focusing on supporting neighborhood centers as well for alternative modes. And when possible, looking at projects that can achieve multiple statewide goals and help achieve identified regional goals through working with our rural and MPO partners. Next slide, please. I think this was mentioned a couple of times during some of our presentations on the planning process, which is we have a wealth of data available. And we're putting in a plug for this again, that we have this tool that was developed in order to help with making decisions, which include much of the data that is available through both our planning partners and through us, through divisions here at CDOT, and making that available publicly through our website to help with making informed decisions. So there is a link to this in your packet if you're able to go to it, but it is available on codot.gov as well. The next two slides are just a couple examples of some of the data that's available. So we can happy to take questions about the data, or able to notify myself or staff when we're able to go through the data if their questions come up. But if we're able to go to the next slide, one example includes identifying where some of those poor assets are. Which includes, this is a map as of 2023, which oftentimes the data, we have to collect the data, then we have to process the data. So we use the best data that we have available, but as of 2023, this is where the majority of poor state highways are throughout the state. Conversely, on the next slide, this identifies the drivability or the condition of all of our state highways throughout the state, with green being those of having high drivability life, yellow being moderate drivability life, and low drivability life in red. Next slide, please. I think this was presented by the Chief Financial Officer last fall in a more comprehensive presentation. But in terms of the funding for the 10-year plan, most but not all of the funding is in terms of the strategic funding pot, which we're anticipating to be around $200 to $250 million annually. And I will note that this is planning totals, not the actual budget. The actual budget, of course, we just had a workshop on that a few minutes ago, but it is planning tools, so that way we're able to determine what we can do over the next 10 years. But the sources of those funds includes a variety of sources from both state and federal programs, and it's based on what we currently think is available through our revenue allocation and program distribution funds. Now, conversely, in terms of, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Conversely, in terms of how we are able to determine where these funds will go throughout the state, there is already a formula set in place for determining control totals that go out to each portions of the state that was passed by the commission. The commission resolution is up there for reference, which basically allocates determining from that strategic pot where those allocations will go. So those are the assumptions that we're taking into consideration when we're looking at how to allocate some of the resources over the next 10 years. Next slide, please. In terms of the transition between the current and the next plan, so as part of the package that will be approved and brought forward to the commission later on this year, is taking a look at not only a next iteration of the pipeline, but also a new 4-year prioritized plan. So those are the subsets within the actual 10-year plan that has more concrete financial information. We're able to allocate that strategic funding pot with more certainty. And then we do that again through another prioritized plan a little bit later on in the out years. But we will bring forward potential planning totals in those out years in order to help us decide where things will come next as we go through execution of this plan. Next slide, please. And then in terms of accountability and transparency, as I mentioned, the department has worked on a variety of items to keep our stakeholders informed, keep the public informed on the progress of the plan. And a lot of those items will continue going forward into the next iteration of the plan as well, which includes the accountability dashboard, which is updated monthly. So when there are decisions that are brought forth in terms of changes in funding, primarily those are updated in the accountability dashboard. There is also a quarterly 10-year plan report with project status updates that will continue going forward into the next iteration of the plan, and the annual 10-year plan report, which we include as part of the draft budget submission that we do that the department does in December. That is another item that we're going forward as well. And also much of that information feeds into the overall CDOT accomplishments report that is published shortly after the beginning of the next calendar year. Some of the other items that we heard through outreach with not only the commission, the Efficiency and Accountability Committee, and our local partners includes, the project fact sheets were very popular, and we want to make sure that we have those continually available and updated and moving towards management of the 10-year plan in our current portfolio and project management system. So we have integrated information going forward on that. And of course, we'll have the websites available on a lot of our projects, some of which include like Floyd Hill and others. Next slide, please. In terms of timeline, we're working towards bringing forward a package in December. So there's a lot of work to be done in between that time, which is looking at potential needs, looking at potential projects, working with our local partners, and identifying what can be identified as new projects to be added into the pipeline, knowing that we still have a lot of projects that are in the current 10-year plan that need to be delivered. And so those conversations will be ongoing throughout these next few months in order to culminate into the late fall and into the winter process, which includes bringing forward the 10-year plan to the commission for consideration, bringing forward the greenhouse gas report, which is required under 2 CCR 601 that shows our compliance with the greenhouse gas planning standard, public comment on the 10-year plan, and then ultimately adoption. So which is aiming for at the end of this year. That will in turn be effective on July 1 of 2026 with a new 4-year prioritized plan. It will feed into our STIP. And we can be ready to, and the department can be ready to deliver it. I think this is my last slide. So this is kind of summarizing some of the items that as part of the timeline. We do have monthly meetings with the 10-year plan committee of the TC, updating them on activities. So those conversations are available, and happy to include other TC members if you're interested in participating as we get through this. And I'm sure there will be a lot more workshops in the future talking about the 10-year plan. But I wanted to, in particular, we wanted to give an update on the telephone town hall, since that's going to be the first item on the agenda, and knowing some of the logistics behind that. But with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions commissioners may have.
All right. Thank you, Darius and Marissa. Vice Chair Adams.
Thank you, Darius. I have a question about the 4-year prioritization process that we use in order to both determine the priorities of the projects. And I realize from your slide that it is funding related to where the source of the money can be identified. But my question is, since this is somewhat of an ongoing thing, what happens when we have to move a project out of the 4-year? How do we decide that and who's involved in deciding that? And can you give me any indication historically of how much of what's in the 10-year plan or the 4-year portion of the 10-year plan gets changed because of someone's not ready or whatever the circumstances are? Is it 10% or is it some way to think about, which I would hope would be a small portion of what we say is we're going to do in 4 years, doesn't get changed a lot because of either funding or because people aren't ready with the project. So can you describe a little bit about that process and who's involved?
Thank you, Commissioner. I think you hit the nail on the head. It is in terms of year of funding more so than on year of delivery, because the farther we go out into the future, and Jeff, you can correct me if I get any of this wrong, the less certain we are in terms of what will come in terms of the funding aspects. We have an idea based off of the situation that's happening now, but there may be other there may be future legislation, there may be other conditions that happen as we go out. And that's why we kind of break it out into 4 years, where the funding piece for each of the project is more finalized within that 4-year time frame, more so than in the out years, where the out years are less constrained, so to speak, but to give some idea of some control totals in terms of allocating resources. So I hate to put you on the spot, Jeff, but did I get that correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think a couple of things. I don't know that I could speak quantifiably to, exactly how much of allocations changed. I think, in general, I think the projects are pretty stable in terms of what's in that 4-year window. I think you will sometimes see a little bit of shifting where we push something out and pull something forward that has to do with, one project being ready and one not, and we need funds now and this project can wait. But I think in general, the mix of the projects are pretty stable. Similarly, I think you see some shifting around of dollars, savings on some, cost overruns on others. Most of the time, that's relatively small. You will have instances like Vale Pass, I'm thinking, or, Floyd Hill, big projects where we sometimes have more significant need to reallocate. But generally, I think the mix of projects is relatively stable. And to Darius's point, we do sort of plan in terms of sort of year of revenue. So it's sort of like, how much revenue do we think? Now let's plan to that. But the actual delivery is typically lags a bit beyond that, just based on our delivery timeline. So.
No, I think that's fine. That was what I was hoping you would say, that it's pretty sticky. Once we decide on the 10-year, the 4-year portion of it, unless there's some extraordinary, unusual circumstances, it's largely fixed once we lock in the 10-year plan.
I think that's generally true.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments? Hearing none, thank you. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioners, and thank you, Will, for the feedback on that. And no doubt we'll be back for many more meetings to come over the next year.
Yeah, and I was talking to Darius before. Good luck on getting all the town halls lined up. That's always a little bit, with all of us, it's a little bit like herding cats. So, hey.
Absolutely.
Do your best is all we can say.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Hart.
You bet. All right, that takes us to the next item, which is the Safe Routes to School program and approval of grant awards from the State Routes to School Advisory Committee. Commissioner Garcia, I think that you have a point you want to make.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hart. I participated in this grant program, so I am going to respectfully abstain from discussion on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Garcia. And then we'll go ahead and turn it over to Darius.
Thank you. And I wanted to introduce Medora Bornhoff, our Main Streets and Active Transportation Section Manager, who is going to go through the Safe Routes to School awards presentation.
Thank you, Darius, Commissioners. So as Darius said, my name is Medora Bornhoff, and I lead the Main Streets. Not loud enough? Okay, thank you. I lead the Main Streets and Active Transportation section within DTD. I'll be giving the presentation today, but we are joined online by 2 other individuals. Melissa Trukowski-Houghton, who runs the Safe Routes to School program, and one of the members of the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee, Elise Waln. So if we have very specific questions that come up during the discussion today, I may turn it over to them to see if they can address that during today's workshop. So it's been some time since we've brought information about the Safe Routes to School program to the commission. So before getting into the grant award recommendations, I wanted to provide an overview of what this program entails. Safe Routes to School has been a program in Colorado for almost 20 years. We'll be celebrating the 20th anniversary this fall. It's both a program and a nationwide movement to make travel to school, including walking, biking, rolling, and scooting, safe, convenient, and fun for all children. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. There are a lot of benefits we see from this program. There are benefits to the individual students through the ability to incorporate physical activity into their everyday routine, providing health benefits to the students, and also allowing them to show up to school ready to learn. Getting that physical activity incorporated in the morning really helps students focus and be engaged in the classroom. We see benefits to communities and neighborhoods through stronger social connections between neighbors who participate in this program. We see benefits to parents and families through reduced costs for gas and not needing to shuttle kids back and forth from school. And then benefits in the school area, reduced congestion in those drop-off and pickup zones, and improved air quality around the schools. So, next slide. A key aspect of Colorado's Safe Routes to School program is providing grant funds to local communities to implement their projects. The funding source we use for this grant program is federal formula program funds from the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. That Surface Transportation Block Grant Program has a set aside called the Transportation Alternatives Program per federal law that goes to walking and biking improvements. And so that use of the TAP formula funds is a really great fit for this Safe Routes to School grant program. In addition to the grant funding, the program offers a number of resources to support Safe Routes to School programs across the state. They have a community engagement toolkit that they make available, school crossing guard training materials. They promote events twice a year. There's a walk and roll to school day and a bike and roll to school day. They promote that by providing promotional materials, posters, and giveaways like bookmarks that can be requested by schools to provide to students. There's a free webinar series that the program hosts that has been very popular and a great venue for practitioners to get together and learn about best practices and case studies, anything from engagement practices to education or evaluation. Lastly, one of the newer efforts from the program is called the Community of Practice Cohort, and we're really excited about this aspect of the program. What it is it's for communities who haven't done Safe Routes to School activities in the past, and it's a more intense technical assistance to those communities as they launch their Safe Routes to School programs. They can learn from each other and learn from the program staff. So we're really excited about this new aspect of the program. Next slide. The grant funding program through Safe Routes has been very popular. So since 2005, the program has awarded $36 million in grant funds. Well, let's go to the, thank you. $36 million to almost 300 projects around the state. The requests that the program has received have totaled over $80 million in requests. So the requests are far outstripping the available funds that we can award. There is a link on this slide to an interactive map showing all of the projects that have been awarded through the program. A word of warning, when you first click on that link, you will see the active projects only, and it takes a few more clicks to get through to the completed projects. But they are on there, and once you get on there, you can click on any one of those dots and see the applicant, the project description, the amount of funding, the year, and the school district. So that's a really great way to see the projects that have been awarded around the state. The program most recently held a call for projects this past fall. And this call for projects is awarding funds for fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2026. And it was, again, a very competitive call. So for the rest of this presentation, we'll be going through more details about that call and then presenting the recommended awards. So next slide, please. There are two main types of projects that can be awarded through this grant program: infrastructure projects and non-infrastructure projects. So infrastructure projects are any of those projects that provide new infrastructure like crossing improvements, sidewalks, bike lanes, trails, speed reduction or traffic calming efforts, curb extensions, etc. The non-infrastructure projects encompass anything from education programs to encouragement programs, things like Walk and Roll to School Day, walking school bus, or bike train. And if you haven't heard of those are really great programs where adult volunteers will lead a group of students walking or biking to school, providing that support and extra safety for them. Applicants to the program select which strategy they want to propose. So it is up to the community to determine what works best for them. And then the program decides which of the applications that come forward are best fit for the program. For infrastructure projects, one of the elements that's considered is shovel readiness, because we have the funds available and we want to make sure that the projects can get out the door and make those improvements and improve safety for the kids getting to school. So next slide, please. There is a committee that reviews all of the proposed applications. They are called the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee. And this committee is identified in state statute and also in the Colorado Code of Regulations. Both the statute and the regulations identify the types of members that need to serve on this committee. And then the executive director of CDOT appoints the actual representatives. So this committee comprises or includes an educator, parent, bicyclist, pedestrian, 2 representatives from metropolitan planning organizations, 2 representatives from rural transportation planning regions, and a law enforcement representative. This committee works really hard to review these applications, and so we're really grateful to them for their time and expertise as they review these applications and determine which ones are the best fit for the program. Next slide. So there are a number of criteria that they use when reviewing applications. As I said, the most recent call had an application period open this fall, and it was a 2-month process for them to review and score these applications that occurred in January and February when they met to review and score applications. So these are some of the criteria that they use when they're looking at the applications. They're looking at whether the project addresses both pedestrians and bicyclists. They're looking at how the problem has been identified and whether the action plan or the solution that's being proposed is a really good fit for the identified problem. The Safe Routes to School program is very data-driven, and all applications need to submit a pre-project evaluation data set looking at students' current travel behaviors and a survey of parents. So there is quite a bit of upfront work for applicants to apply to this program, but those survey data that are submitted are really informative for the committee to understand current baseline conditions in that school area and opportunities for improvement. All of the projects are required to have an educational component. So including the infrastructure projects, it's not enough to just build the infrastructure in that location. We also want to make sure that the students and the parents understand how to use that infrastructure, and have the education needed to safely get to school. They also look at project partnership. It's required to have support from the school principals, but other support is critical as well when the committee is reviewing the applications. Let's go to the next slide. What you have in your packet is a full list of the 23 applications that were submitted. One correction there, I believe 22 are listed in your packet. There was one application submitted by an entity that was not eligible to submit, and so that's not shown. But so the 22 applications that were eligible are shown. What you see on the slide are the projects that are being recommended for funding, and I've split them into a slide for infrastructure and a slide for non-infrastructure. The maximum amount of funding that applicants can request is $1 million. We had a total request across the 23 applications that were submitted of $13 million, but we had $8 million to award. These 10 projects on this slide are the 10 that the committee is recommending get approved for funding. And I won't list the project title, but I do just want to read out the names of the applicants, including Canyon City, City and County of Denver, La Veta School District in the town of La Veta, Town of Paonia, City of Lakewood, Town of Basalt, City of Fort Collins, Town of Cedar Edge, Town of Lyons, and Town of Johnstown. Next slide, please. There are 2 projects for non-infrastructure awards that the committee is recommending approval for. They include for the City and County of Denver and the Town of Windsor. Next slide, please. So what we're doing is bringing this information to you today for discussion. We'll be taking this information to the STAC for discussion at their April meeting, and we'll come back to April's TC meeting to request your approval of these project recommendations. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair and see what questions you have.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Stewart.
Thanks for this presentation. I'm really familiar with this. Safe Routes to School for many years and all the wonderful projects you funded. You showed us some of the criteria and also talked about shovel readiness. And you talked about 22 applications, $13 million, $8 million to award. Can you tell me why some projects were not selected? Just an idea of how they didn't make the cut? And how many of those did you have? A number?
Yes,
Okay,
there were.
thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, so with 23 applications submitted, 12 of those are being recommended for funding. So that leaves 11 projects that are not being recommended for funding. It is a robust application. As I was mentioning during my presentation, applicants are required to submit data from surveys of parents and student travel tally. There are requirements around photos of the current project location and maps identifying key locations around the school and the project location. The project team works really closely with communities interested in applying, and they provide a lot of resources to help them with the application process. So they offer a webinar that is live and then recorded, made available for applicants to review. And they also make themselves available for one-on-one consultations to work through this pretty robust application process, especially with communities that haven't done this type of application before. I think there was another aspect of your question that I am forgetting.
I was just wondering, some of the applications that didn't get funded, can you think of specific reasons why they didn't? Is there a sort of a overall reason that somebody missed the mark, or is it across the board?
Yes, so for those 11 applications that are not being recommended for funding, there were either missing information within the application, or they weren't a great fit for the Safe Routes to School program. In some cases, they were a good fit, but they weren't quite ready. So the shovel readiness is really critical so that we can get those dollars out the door. When applicants, after the TC makes the decision, part of the process is to notify applicants that there may be other grant opportunities that provide a better fit for their proposed project. And so staff have already been meeting with grant program managers to talk through these applications, determine which other grant funding sources may be a better fit so they can provide that information at the time of providing a no response to the applicant. And then we'll also offer meetings with the applicant to talk through how to improve the application for future rounds.
Okay, well, next we got Commissioner Gutierrez and then Vice Chair Adams.
Thank you. I appreciate this explanation. So I have two things that I'm curious about. One is there a matching requirement that the municipalities have to contribute sort of as a minimum bar that kind of says, you've got to put up, if we are 80, you're 20, or you're 80 and we're 20, or whatever the story is on that. So that was one thing. And the second thing is, if I heard you correctly at the beginning, it sounded like this is also funded with dollars coming from the federal government. And in light of what's going on over there today, how much are we really getting from them? And so many things are getting, quote, cut by DOGE. So are we at risk here of some of the things we're trying to do, that the money could disappear just because someone decided that this isn't something they want to fund?
Thank you for those questions. So to the first question, the standard match rate in this program is 20%. And most of the projects being recommended for funding do need to provide that 20% match to the project. What has changed in the last couple of years with this program is to recognize that some communities have much lower resources and it's much more difficult for them to bring that 20% match to the project. So in light of that, the program uses the MMOF match reduction formula, and communities that qualify as 0% match for MMOF also qualify for 0% match through the Safe Routes to School program. 4 of the 12 projects that are recommended for award qualify for 0% match. So you'll see that in the table in your packet. I did not include it in the presentation slides, but thank you for asking that question, but it's there in your packet. Yes. No changes have been made to the formula programs that we have heard of to date. And so the intention is the funds are there and to award them. And if they get pulled back, then that would have to be pulled back.
So if I could add, Mr. Chair, the funds come from the TAP program, which is part of a formula program, excuse me, if I can get out, formula program from the federal government that's set in statute that was passed by the IIJA legislation. It is not a discretionary grant from the federal government that the executive branch can easily pull, if that helps.
Although they're challenging a lot of things that otherwise would be non-discretionary, but I hear what you're saying, and we just hope that either if we have to go to court or somebody has to go to court, that judges do the right thing, even though they're at threat of being impeached these days. But thank you for that answer, Darius. That was helpful. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Commissioner.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Gutierrez.
Yes, wonderful program, by the way. As when I was mayor of Loveland, we had several of these projects that went through. You had on one of your slides the educational component, but it was from my perspective as an educator, top down, right? And I don't know if it's a requirement of your program, but I know that in our city, those students from that school that identified those projects that they needed to do had to make a presentation to our transportation advisory board, and then came and made the presentation to the city council and so on as part of the process, which to me is a great educational component piece from the bottom up, where those students are learning about how government works, right? And so I didn't know if that was just something we added or if that was something that was part of the program.
If Melissa is able to unmute, I wonder if she might have more to say on this question.
I am, and I'm trying to turn on my video as well so you can see me. I believe that was all the Loveland's doing with the presentation that you described. I think that sounds fabulous. That's not something that we require. Part of the reason why we have the education component is because we think it's really important that the community learns what's happening and why it's happening. And so something like that is a perfect fit.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Cook.
Yeah, just quickly, first of all, thanks. And I echo everything about how worthwhile and helpful and used this program is. Can you say a little bit more about the community of practice cohort, just briefly, and give an example or how that's being fleshed out?
Yeah, this community of practice cohort is just getting off the ground. It's one of the newest aspects of the program. So Melissa, again, if you want to unmute, you may have more details to share.
Sure. I really appreciate this question because it is something that we're really excited to be able to offer as part of our program. So essentially the idea of the community of practice is to create an on-ramp for communities that may be interested in doing Safe Routes to School projects, but maybe just don't have the resources, the time, whatever it may be. So we came up with this idea to offer this, and we currently have 3 communities that have been selected to participate. And so those are Douglas County School District, the town of Rye, and Delta County. And we did interviews with communities that were interested in participating, and we then decided what seemed like a good fit between the 3 communities and what we had to offer. And so another aspect of this program is we're working in partnership with Safe Routes Partnership, which is a national Safe Routes to School organization. So in addition to the technical expertise that we bring as part of the CDOT team, we're also recruiting national technical assistance to support these communities. Another aspect of this program is our partnership with CDPHE, and they actually have some funding that they can support these communities. So we have these quarterly meetings that will happen over the course of this year with the communities, and then we also provide one-on-one technical assistance opportunities with the idea that we want everyone to experience a quick win initially. So we just had our first meeting last month, and we're identifying quick wins based on what the needs are in the community. And then CDPHE has some small dollar amounts to fund those quick wins so that they can just have success right off the bat. And just an example of that, there was a fatality in Douglas County School District, and that is what really prompted them wanting to be part of this. And so something that they're talking about is how do they talk to their community about this, and how do they demonstrate what action they're taking and support the families that were involved in the unfortunate loss of the student of theirs. So it's a pilot project. We'll finish up in the fall and offer a webinar to give an overview of this program, but it is something that we hope is really successful and that we can continue to offer and really create that partnership where the community is at.
Great, thank you very much.
Commissioner Bowman.
I just was wondering, how long has the CDOT been funding this program?
This program has been funded since 2005.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Medora, appreciate it. Okay, that takes us to the next item, which is the Region 1 debris and cleanup update. Jessica Michelbus.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We just wanted to give an update on our camp cleanup program and debris cleanup program. We get a lot of questions about this program. We get a lot of customer inquiries and requests coming through. So I wanted to bring our team and highlight the hard work that they're doing and just give a little bit of background. Next slide. In 2019, Region 1 initiated the Homeless Camp Cleanup, the acronym HCC team, which was originally comprised only of CDOT staff. And we had some correctional folks that would often help us. So the team was responsible for cleaning up the homeless camps. What we noticed in between 2019 and 2022 was that we had several just exposures to some things that were not great for morale for our team members. Our team members were not really expecting to do this type of work as part of their daily duties. So it was really challenging on morale. It was really challenging on safety. So in 2022, we came to the Transportation Commission with this unique idea of establishing the homeless camp cleanup team with the ability to hire an external contractor. So thank you to the commissioners for providing the $1 million. We wanted to come today and report to you how we've utilized that money, the benefit of being able to hire an external contractor, and really kind of where we're headed, and just talk a little bit about the process. Obviously, homelessness is a very sensitive topic. It's a very complex social topic that's really hard to solve, but our goal really at CDOT is the safety of both the individuals living in our right-of-way and the safety of the traveling public. So with me today, I have AJ, who leads our homeless camp cleanup team. Next slide. And so I wanted you to be able to hear directly from the team who works kind of daily. This is his job. And so he put together a really great presentation, and he's excited to be here today. His supervisors are also over there. Some of those guys have been up this morning fighting snow and leading teams. So it's been a really long day for them. So thanks for coming. But with that, I'll turn the floor over to AJ.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, Commission. My name, like Jessica said, is AJ. My real name is Anthony Rossi. My team, like Jessica was saying, goes in and we clean CDOT right-of-way. The team that makes up this team is Mark Krimis, my superintendent, or excuse me, my deputy superintendent, my LTC ops, Matthew Franklin, and then of course myself. I have 2 TM2s, John Frazier and Dominic Cruz, and then 5 TM1s, David, Bernie, Kybert, Roscoe, and Julius. I have 2 guys that work with me, John Frazier and Dave Scholler. They make up Region 1's homeless team. The other team members are my tree crew, but they work really close to me as well. Next slide, please. Planning for clamps. So this step is very crucial. We want to make sure that first we are doing everything right to make sure that our money is going to the right areas. We receive complaints through the CDOT customer service line. We receive complaints through law enforcement teams. So they'll come directly to me and say, hey, we think this is on your property. Can you double check this for me? Local agencies such as Dottie for Denver, or Adams County's street maintenance teams. And then maintenance from CDOT will reach out to me and say, we have a camp. We verify these complaints through our property maps, GISs, C-Plan, internal and external mapping systems. Like I said, we really want to make sure that our funding is going to CDOT and not to anybody else, because our roads intersect with everybody else. How we do that is one of my team members will go out and we will assess the priority, right? So if an individual is unsafe or is too close to the roadway, we will give them a 24-hour notice to vacate the property. I don't use this too often. It's too much of a burden on everybody, the system. We want to make sure that we are using the 7-day posting. And all our posting is CDOT maintenance, we're coming through to clean the area. You need to vacate. Please leave the area. With the 7-day posting, it gives the individual time to remove their items, their personal items, tents, whatever they have collected, and hopefully they disperse it onto another parcel, or they go and receive help. During that 7 days, we'll essentially work with local municipalities to get outreach or other teams in there to help these individuals. Next slide, please. During that 7 days, we also schedule with the 2 contractors, environmental hazmat services and cleaning guys. These guys are trained in hazmat removal and debris removal. So if there's any type of weird stuff that pops up, they know how to treat it. With that is we coordinate with the local authorities to help remove and abate the area. On the 7th day, usually it's not the 7th day, usually it's like the 8th day, so they get plenty of time. We'll go in and remove all the contaminated items that they leave behind or that they discard on our property. After that, so step number 6, we put up no trespassing signs featured on the right side there. Oh, excuse me, my right, probably your guys' left. I don't know, I'm backwards now. So to make sure that the local authorities close down that area. We don't want them going back into an unsafe environment. We will use CRS 184502 to enforce that and have the authorities enforce that because CDOT is not an authority. Next slide, please. So why do we do this? As I mentioned before, it's safety. We want to make sure that the traveling public is safe, that they're not going down our highways and seeing a big blue tent on the side of the road that's blowing away in this lovely wind we're having. We want to make sure that they're focused on driving. Pedestrian safety, like you were just having a conversation with Safe to Streets. We want to make sure that our roadways are safe. Environmental impact. We want to be good stewards of our land and our property, protecting ecosystems, making sure that wildlife isn't harmed. Here in Colorado, our wildlife is beautiful. We want to make sure that we are being good stewards of that. On the picture on the screen there, it's I-76 over Clear Creek. The bridge there has been burned by a fire 5 times by the individual and has created a huge environmental impact for our teams. So we went in there and mitigated this at a cost of $5,464.25. So we appreciate the funding. It's going to good causes. Did you have anything? Oh, okay. Next slide, please. Public health, like most things, being dirty does not lead to friendly pests. It brings in varmints. So we want to make sure that we are keeping the area clean and free of pests or nuisance animals. Economic benefits. We want to make sure that that tourism is coming in. They see our right-of-ways as clean and clear and beautiful, like we all see Colorado. And then community pride. I don't know if you guys know this, but CDOT is a very prideful organization. We want to keep it that way. And we just want to make sure that we are being good stewards, being good, effective neighbors to our teams and communities. Next slide, please. CDOT does not operate a dedicated outreach team. So outreach means that an individual will go into a camp who is trained. They will give them bus fare. They will give them health services, cell phones, anything like that. We rely on the local agencies to do that. It is their citizens. So we really force them to be proactive in that situation. Lots of kind of words I've used is outreach or navigators. Like I said, those are human services. We rely on park rangers. So like Adams County, that whole organization relies on these park rangers to drive through Adams County and they maintain their portion of right-of-way. Street engagement teams, so that is here locally in Denver. They go out and they reach the unhoused population, and then street personnel, just maintenance teams in general. Next slide, please. The hazardous material that Jessica brought up, that we face day to day while doing these cleanups. Plastic bottles with human waste, buckets with human waste, the burn pits that are used to strip wiring, so like the Romex plastic off the copper wiring so they can go recycle it, paints and other aerosols, hypodermic needles, and then I think 2 slides ago, you saw the 55-gallon unmarked drums. That was fun. Those all had to be taken off our property, stored, tested, then removed. What we found is they were full of rocks, actually, and water. So, good. Batteries, propane tanks so that the individuals can stay warm. And of course, electrical wiring and drug manufacturing waste. In the picture there, this bridge, so these items were taken out of one of our tub girders. So underneath our bridge from 36 to 270, you can walk underneath it, and it's for inspections and stuff like that. We found a meth lab that had blown up in the bridge, and these items were pulled out after. The cleanup cost us $14,225.78. Next slide, please. Just a little cost breakdown. So from when we started the HC teams back in 2019 to present, we've unloaded 11,207 tons of trash and debris, a cost of $834,968. The number of camps that CDOT maintenance crews have removed is 415. With my team and the contractors from August 22nd, of 2022 to February 25, we've removed 660 tons or 47 dump trucks worth of debris. Our big dump trucks, not our little dump trucks, just want to specify. We've spent $972,620. The $29,563 that you see remaining there is invoices that have not been paid. We also work with IGAs through Arvada, Adams, and Aurora. We don't have how many tons they've gotten because they run those programs for us. They've spent $211,444.91, making a total of 68 camps. Next slide, please. Just a breakdown of cost. So Region 1 had 73% of homeless related cleanups. This is all funding that could have been used to maintain our roadways and safety items. Next slide, please. A little picture of what's going on and what we're seeing out there. This is a pump house. So this was an irrigation pump house that used to bring water from one side of the highway up to another side of the highway when we used to irrigate. The individual broke through 2 steel doors and decided that this was going to be their living quarters. We then gave them the 7-day posting to remove all their stuff. What you see there is what they left. That was a cost of $4,568. The end result is our lovely pump house back, and it's now sealed, completely sealed. Next slide, please. This is right here at I-25 at 8th Avenue. This is just beyond the wall where no traffic can see, but traffic can drive over. It is a very unsafe spot. We've had cars go over here several times. The individual did remove their items. Obviously, they left their trash and debris. It's another $3,278.98. Next slide, please. I-25 at 44th. This individual dug themselves into the side of the roadway, which is holding up the wall. So he removed all the dirt and then placed their camp on the side of the highway. This camp cost us $8,425. The reason why this is a little bit more is because all the stuff had to be handpicked and then carried out to the side of the road. Next slide, please. So road hazards and debris removal. This is a little bit different than my program. My program is just homeless camp stuff. This program, we use Colorado Correctional Industry, which is a great program. The individuals are on parole. They get to experience life back in general population, right? So being a citizen again. It's one step closer to becoming back into society. These guys, you'll see them on the side of the road. They will pick debris and remove it and put it into our plastic bags. Then will be picked up by our maintenance crews. Debris removal. So say if a big piece of debris comes off a truck, like sometimes it does, we have a 518 crew that has a truck mounted attenuator with a snowplow on it. So that way myself or other teams aren't out there getting debris. We pick it up with the snowplow and move it to the side of the shoulder. That way we're safe. We can put it in the back of the truck. We have a couple hazmat removal and disposal teams. So the tires that you see that are blowing up in the roadway, we take those to a designated area in our CDOT yards. Then we recycle them for 25 cents per pound. And I don't know if you guys have ever touched a tire, they're heavy, especially the big trucking tires that seem to end up on our highways. The propane tanks, we just go exchange them back to the vendor. That's a free charge to us, thankfully. And then for road hazards, such as like a diesel spill. I think we just had one a few months ago at 6th Avenue going up to the mountains. That truck leaked all its diesel fuel into the river. These two teams, so like I said, environmental hazmat services and cleaning guys, barricaded the area, had to remove, I think it was like 5,000 tons of soil and then have clean soil put back into the riverbed. Next slide, please. This is our infamous Highway 58 and I-70 flyover that we made the news on. I try to keep CDOT out of the news because that's what we want to do. This was kind of by happenstance. The individual was walking down the side of the road, jumped up onto the abutment wall at the same time a Wheat Ridge officer was driving past. And behind there, it's kind of hard to tell, but this is those big tub girders. You can get behind there so we can do our inspection. They removed the blast doors essentially and decided they were going to start bringing in debris. They had a kitchenette in there. They had propane stoves, propane heaters, all the things that we don't want in our bridges that can explode and then cost us lots of money. To clean this out, it was $18,762 over several days. In one of the photos up there, you see one of our team members with scuba gear. It's because in that tub girder are alarms. So fresh air alarms were going off. And I don't know how the individual was living in there because we could barely breathe. Next slide, please. Burnham Yard. This was a task. It was a little bit before my time. However, the team did a great job. So we hired the contractors, the cleaning guys, to come in, mitigate. We also had to work heavily with Denver PD in removing the individuals who were living in this. There's so many nooks and crannies that individuals were very hard to find. They knew the system. They can probably tell you where everything was at blindfolded because they have to walk it at night with no lights on. The cost of this cleanup was $49,456. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I mean, this kind of a program is always eye-opening. Do we have any questions or comments from any of the commissioners? Vice Chair Adams.
I'd just like to thank you too, because, and your entire team, because, you know, until you see this, I mean, you just don't appreciate all that you guys have to go through and your whole team to try and keep this so that it is safe and it's clean, because this is tragic that people are even living like this. So again, thank you, and thank your entire team.
Thank you for your money.
Right, any other, Commissioner Gutierrez?
I also want to commend you on doing this. I have been to other states where they are not doing that. And I will tell you that the tourism piece that you're talking about and when you drive along an interstate and all along, very overt. This was a little more covert, but in some of the states that I've driven through, it's pretty overt. The camps are actually out on the green spaces where they're highly visible. So yeah, high commendation to you and your team for doing such a great job and a tough job, quite frankly. So, thank you.
Commissioner Bowman and then Commissioner Stewart.
Think we're on. I just want to, on behalf of tourism, which is my segment, thank you so much. And yes, this was very eye-opening. So we appreciate you and your team.
Commissioner Stewart.
Thanks so much for the work you do. Adams County, the area that I represent, has a lot of this in Adams County. And I know the Adams County Commissioners appreciate the collaboration. And it took some time to get to that, to figure out who could do what and what legal rights were out there. And I was on the commission in 2022 when we put that money out there. It's well spent. What you guys do is incredible. And the traveling public has no clue that this is going on. When John Lorme told me about this a number of years ago, I was shocked that the kind of living conditions people believe is okay, not only for them, but on private property. So I know we've been concerned out there about people living in these homeless areas, and they're sometimes impaired and they walk into our highways and get killed. I mean, it's a big issue. So thank you, gentlemen, for all you do. It's not a thankless job. We thank you. Thank you.
That's a good point. And it's a tough nut to crack, but I'll call on Commissioner.
Sorry, just a quick comment. So on one of those slides, it looked like you spent all the money and you've done such a good job that you don't have any more work ahead of you. Is that correct?
You guys gave us more funding, so.
Okay, good. I was just checking if we needed to reappropriate
Yes.
the funds for that. So good
Yeah, but
job.
we're always accepting more money.
All right. Well, good job. Thank you.
Commissioner Cook.
Yeah.
Commissioner Cook.
Ditto. One thing, these sites often are not visible to the public, but sometimes they are, and sometimes they're in proximity that you could consider hazardous, of peril to the people who are walking by. For example, Clear Creek and I-76 has a bike trail right next to it. And I know at Sheridan, I think that's one that Arvada cleaned up pursuant to the agreement you have. I'm glad you do those. But that was visible from the G line as you go by. So, this is just, I think it was Commissioner Adams. It's tragic that this is happening. I'm glad you're coordinating with the navigators who have the resources to help. But it seems that, I'm sorry that you're having to do it, but I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad you're on it. And I'm glad we have the contractors who can help with this. So thank you.
Commissioner Gutierrez.
Yeah, I just wanted another addition here. And some of these places are unsafe for the people who are occupying them. Fort Collins just experienced 2 deaths of people who had gotten up underneath one of these culverts, and they'd broken through the gates and all of that. And so it's very important, the work that you are all doing to keep those folks safe as well. It's tragic, like Commissioner Adams says, that we've got people living in this manner, but what you guys are doing really, really is important.
Yeah, and the 2 cents I'd like to throw in is definitely a tough nut to crack, and CDOT can't obviously do it all. It's one thing that I think that we're all up and down the Front Range, and if you've been traveling anywhere else in the country, you know that this isn't unique to Colorado either. It's all over the place. So the one thing that I'm learning more and more and more is just finding out a way to get all the agencies to cooperate with each other, all the governments to cooperate with each other, and then just try to figure out everybody's respective roles. So I'm very proud of the fact that you folks in District 1 have stepped up for the CDOT perspective and helped us tackle it there, particularly in cooperation with all the other agencies. I think that's the only way that works. Difficulty is how much work you do, and then you just wonder if it all comes back. And the only way that that can ultimately be tackled is if we all figure it out together. So thank you. I'm sure that we're not going to figure it all out here, but it's nice seeing that we're participating. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I think that that concludes today's agenda unless anybody else has anything else they'd like to talk about. I don't think so. I think we're pretty much worn out. Yeah.
Chair for life.
Yeah, we're here for life. I think they were all worn out. So we'll go ahead and call it a day. We'll adjourn today and we will meet you back over here for tomorrow's regular meeting. Thank you.